It's now within the guidelines, right?
It is.
So
Technically.
we probably support it, right? We
It's
fa-
in the guideline, but it's got a huge increase in headcount. Here we've
Yeah.
got 2 more people coming.
All right, I'm going to put a check next to 6.
we got Dean, Dick, and Dean and Dick coming.
Okay, so
Wow.
let's plow on. 7 then is municipal capital projects. Tom?
7,
7,
yes.
yeah.
And we say,
And
Consent
is there
calendar.
discussion? So for the benefit of those of you who just joined us, we are working to go through the articles that were discussed at the last hearing and to determine what the pleasure of the committee is on each one of those. It's been suggested and accepted.
Speak up.
Are the microphones not providing?
Okay,
thank you.
great. That should do it. How's that? Can you hear me? Okay, great. It has been suggested, and I think, is it the consensus that we can handle these as it were a consent agenda and only discuss those which people mark for discussion? That's,
I second that, if that's...
yeah, okay. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of that approach?
Aye.
Okay, it is unanimous.
Okay.
And we
Only gonna
have
discuss
started
the-
going through these. There's no discussion on 3, 4, 5.
Off that we're not going to discuss.
There is question as to whether we will have discussion on 6. Any discussion on 7, 8, 9, 10, I'm sorry, not 10, that's tonight, 17,
What's 17?
18,
Hold on, some 17 is,
Let's catch up with you.
okay,
Free cash?
okay, free cash.
that's the $1 million, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
18 is our sustainable growth rate bylaw.
Does that merit discussion, given that we have cities and counties list?
You need to use a microphone, June, I'm sorry.
I wonder whether that merits discussion, given that we had citizen feedback at the hearing last week.
We can discuss it.
You could vote to take it off the consent list.
Yes.
You
Okay,
want to put
let's-
that on?
let's- Yeah, put
we'll-
it on a...
Down
not
for
on the
discussion.
consent.
Okay, 23. Oops, that's on tonight. Oh, wait,
No.
no, 23,
Needs-
24, 25, and 26 as a group.
We
Any
should take
discussion
those
there?
off.
We need to
should
discuss
discuss
those.
We do, okay.
I think we need to discuss all of those.
Yes.
And 46,
46, I think, is a,
unpaid bills.
we just did.
Okay, all right, so, let's first dispense with the ones about which we don't need discussion. I would entertain a motion that we move affirmative action on each of those, being 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 17, and 46.
So moved.
Okay?
Second.
And seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Good. All right, so should we just take them in order, or is there some particular, would you, who, for instance, wish to discuss the town budget? 6.
Well, I will just say that it is now within the guideline. There is some new expenditures, including personnel that are going to get more expensive over the next few years. But given that the town has been able to make the guideline, I would support Article 6.
I have a question for the finance director on the town budget. In order to make the guideline, we're taking money from a stabilization fund that was established by town meeting for public, basically, public services of some sort. I think it was public safety. And we're not taking explicit vote to take money out of that stabilization fund. And that's a question that I have. Does the town meeting need to take an action to remove money from that stabilization fund? What? Somehow you should help us answer that question.
So I'm Carrie LaFleur, the finance director, and we are live, so it's probably appropriate to stand here. The motion on Article 6 will include an appropriation from that specific stabilization fund. It will have to. That's the only way that funds can be taken out of that stabilization fund.
I looked at the warrant prior to coming to the meeting. There's no language in that article that indicates that funds are actually coming out of that stabilization fund. Is there no information to town meeting that that's what we're doing as part of the formal motion?
Well, it definitely will need to be included in the motion, but I would agree with what you're saying. It's not specifically stated in the warrant article. That has been reviewed. All of the warrant articles have been reviewed with the town moderator, and I don't remember that being an issue.
I mean, I think that this has been a small point that the FinCom has been working through with the town manager regarding this part of the budget. But just the mechanics of this particular stabilization fund, we may need to go back to when it was established, 2010 or 11, whenever that fund was put up, and see what the mechanisms are for taking money out, because the budget does not, when you look at the budget book, it shows that the money is part of the way that's been done. But when you look at the warrant, there's no indication whatsoever that that's what's been done. There's no language in it, and there's no numbers in it that show that. That's all. It's a simple question. So it feels like we're kind of doing this under the covers a little bit.
How much is being taken out of that stabilization fund?
It's over $200,000.
Closer to 3 something.
It's like 270, I think.
Is it?
You have to look in the budget book.
Yeah, I'd have to look, yeah.
How much is in the stabilization fund? Sorry.
Page 174?
174.
174.
So the balance in that particular stabilization fund is about $650,000 at this point in time, and $245,000 would be drawn under the fiscal 20 budget the way it's presented.
So that begs a question. Is that 220 that's being drawn out of that stabilization fund this time included in this budget line item?
I'm not sure.
Well, I think we've been talking about the cost this year to the town of $90,000 for the 4 additional staff. And that doesn't include the monies that are coming from this stabilization fund.
That's true. In order to meet the guideline, only $89,000 came out of the town budget, and the balance, the $245, which Carrie said earlier, is not within, it's non-guideline spending. It's coming out of the stabilization fund.
But it really needs to be, because
Then they wouldn't be in the guideline.
so they're not in the guideline. I think that's my understanding.
Yeah, so I know the chair requested a detail of that account, what has been taken out to date and what remains, and how this budget would plan to use that. And we're in the process of putting that together and could get that to you very shortly. I don't have it here with me today.
Okay.
In the past, if we took money out of stabilization funds to cover operating expenses, would that be considered guideline spending? Or would that be considered out of the guideline spending? Do you know what I mean? Because right now, I think what Tom is saying is that we're spending $245,000 out of a stabilization fund that's not included in the spending that is coming in under the guideline.
Right.
But if we did, we would be over the guideline. So in past years, if we took money out of stabilization funds, was that included as part of spending per guideline?
Yeah, so I would have to go back and look at that, because to the best of my recollection, the only other time, aside from when we took money out at the special town meeting for the school resource officer, was there was a small amount of money coming out, I want to say about $55,000.
Sounds right.
For some additional expenditures at the fire department, and I would have to go back, because I believe that stopped in fiscal 17.
But
how that was
that was special
considered.
town meeting, and there was no guideline.
Right,
So-
but then prior to that, the only other time money was drawn out of that account, to the best of my recollection, was in fiscal 17 and prior, and that was before I was here with the town, so I'd have to go back and look to see
Okay.
how that was accounted for.
So I think we have a meeting scheduled for March 7th.
We do.
And I would be inclined to leave this question open until March 7th. So, any other?
Yeah, I'd agree, and at that meeting, we should have some information on the creation of the stabilization fund and the purposes it's supposed to be used and how it's supposed to be spent and everything.
Any other questions on Article 6 at this point? Okay. I think that the next articles on which discussion was desired are Articles 23, 24, 25, and 26.
We had 18.
18, yes. All right. So, who wishes to discuss Article 18?
Well, so I was the person who suggested that we take time to discuss it before we continue on the path. And, you know, collectively, we all support the concept of sustainable growth. But I think over the course of the public hearing and a prior meeting, that we've heard citizens question whether we needed to codify our desire to do this. And then the second issue, that there seemed to be a degree of befuddlement as to why we needed to do it at all, and that the FinCom held a position of, you know, sage influence over the process and confusion. And so I think, you know, we all support the concept, but whether the warrant is ready to go or we need to fine tune how we present it to people, I wondered if it was worth taking a few moments to pause and discuss that among ourselves. And we had had prior conversation about not liking how we were arriving at the guideline number, and so we made it more generic, which then that caused questioning of, you know, how we were pulling the number, you know, like any number of times it's bumped up against concerns from the citizens.
I would add to that what I heard last week, was that last week? 2 weeks ago, and also from conversations I've had with people, is that the message that we're trying to get out with this article, which is that we have to keep spending within certain guidelines, is getting lost with the method that we're using to put this forward. So, for example, the questions were about why a bylaw change, or and we heard, is this a power play by the Finance Committee? So people are getting, I think the message is getting lost with people's confusion about what the methods that we're choosing. And if this article passes, it's advisory only. But if it fails, I wonder what it says about the influence of the Finance Committee going forward.
So by the methods, Mary, do you mean lack of specificity as to what the methods or the formula or the equation might be, or
What I
some
he-
example of what that might yield?
What I heard was, why is it a bylaw change? And exactly what is a bylaw change? And I don't have a good answer for that. So I think that's what I heard loud and clear, which is, why is it a bylaw change? And why does the Finance Committee need to do this? And why is it codified? And I don't have a good answer.
So I think we should discuss it for longer than the 10 minutes or so we have left. And so I would suggest that we also move this discussion to March 7 as well.
Any other discussion right now? Or is that generally acceptable that we move it to March 7th? Okay, we'll do that. All right, now I think we are at the affordable housing
We are.
articles. All right, Mary, would you like to start the
Sure.
discussion?
I assume we're going to look at these individually rather than as a package, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Then I'll start with number 23, which is the use of free cash. And I would recommend no action on this article because it's using free cash, and the use of free cash is actually a use of property tax. And by using property tax, we're burdening people within Concord that are finding property tax the reason why Concord is no longer affordable to them. So it seems kind of ironic that we would be using property tax to fund affordable housing. That's my first reason for that. My second reason would also be that I think we have better uses of free cash. Free cash would be better used for a stabilization fund to help us maybe smooth out some of the debt we're going to be carrying in the next few years. My third reason would be that I think we need a strong free cash balance because we know we've got debt coming up, and a strong free cash balance obviously means that we will get a lower interest rate, and in the long run it will cost us less to borrow money. And then also I think this is just a bad deal. For $500,000, we would maybe get 1 or 2 units, and 2 years ago we voted $1 million of free cash, and we got, with the hopes that we would get 83 affordable units. So 2 years ago, the town voted $1 million for 83 affordable units, and this year we're thinking of voting $500,000 for maybe 1 or maybe 2. So it just seems like a bad deal. And those are my thoughts.
I'm going to make a motion that we vote no action. You've elaborated numerous reasons, but we need a motion on the table, so I will move no action on this. And we can
Second.
have it seconded.
Second.
So now we can have discussion.
Oh,
No, it's okay. No, it's fine.
I'm not going to say that again.
No, you don't have to say anything. You've said a lot.
But if nobody has anything
Have a
else,
motion on the table, and you gave a lovely, dissertation.
but if nobody has anything else, we can just call the question.
Actually, I've got something. I personally feel that after all of the work this committee did, and the explanation they gave, to me, was a compelling one, that the monies from free cash for this initial year and perhaps as many as 3 or 4 subsequent years will be serving as a kickstarter to the program and as a token of the town's commitment to affordable housing, and will serve to get these programs going while we're waiting to get the approvals and the funds that will come from the subsequent articles. I will admit that I initially thought the idea of using money from free cash for affordable housing was not a good one, but I was convinced by the work and the testimony of the committee, and I personally am in favor of doing this.
Can I make a counter comment?
Absolutely.
In fact, the committee didn't.
No, you may not.
The committee, if you read the committee's report, the committee did not, that was not one of their primary recommendations to use free cash. Their primary recommendations were the other warrant articles, and one of their recommendations was to put actually a line item in the budget. So the use of free cash was not one of their top recommendations.
So I support the no action on this article primarily because of Mary's first argument with respect to the use of property tax money to address affordability in Concord. So I found the first argument the most compelling, which is why I would be in support of no action.
Tom, I also would support no action. I think I don't want to open the door to everyone else going after free cash for their project. And there are going to be a lot of projects that everyone is going to think are worthwhile. It's going to be hard to say no to, and I think this starts a slippery slope. So I think there are other ways that this could be approached. So I would agree with the no action on this.
I have, Tom, one more quick comment. I do want to say I support the concept of affordable housing in general, and as I've said at other times of this meeting, I do pro bono legal work for affordable housing people, but I don't think, I wouldn't support affirmative action on this, and I would point out that we voted either last year or 2 years ago to give $1 million in free cash to the
Junction Village.
Junction Village.
Junction Village,
Right.
and we're scheduled to give more. So, that we've already shown our commitment with free cash that way.
Andrea?
I'm not sure how to phrase this, but, and not being as financially astute as many of you here, I just want to go on the record that somehow Concord has to come up with a better way to finance affordable housing. I think it's very important that Concord open itself up to more people who want to live here, who are not up in the higher financial bracket. I'm not sure how it's done, and maybe this isn't the right way to do it, and maybe we shouldn't support this article, but somehow there needs to be more funds for affordable housing.
Any other discussion? Are you ready for a vote?
Yes.
Right, so there's a motion on the table that we move no action on this article. All those in favor? All those opposed?
Okay.
Once again. All right, so no action. 24.
Well, we have
57. Another one?
Perhaps one. What do you think?
24 is easy.
Isn't 24 easy, Tom?
Well,
It's up to
Goes
you.
with 25 and 26, but
It's just a vehicle to, and the funding of which is the issue.
yes.
24 is actually pretty basic.
That's not easy.
it's not easy.
It's the creation,
No,
right?
it's not easy.
It's not easy.
No, it's not easy.
It is not?
We don't have time for that.
June.
Maybe we should skip ahead and take care of 46, because 24,
Sure.
25, and 6 will have
Right,
more
let's do
robust
that.
conversation.
All right, so we will take up the other three.
46 was on our consent list.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, it was done.
Okay,
Never
that's
mind.
Okay.
My bad.
All right, so we, having reached almost the witching hour of 7 o'clock, this session will be prorogued until the end of the public hearing, at which time we will take up any loose ends we had here, as well as the articles that are going to be discussed during the public hearing. So, I will go to the microphone.
Dean, can you grab my name tag? It's up front there.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second of the Finance Committee's public hearings, the first having been held 2 weeks ago tonight on February 11th. This evening, we will be discussing a number of articles which concern, first, the Community Preservation Committee, and the second grouping will be having to do with schools, the Minuteman Regional Technical High School, and then Concord Public Schools, and after that, the Regional School District. So, without further delay, I introduce Terry Ackerman, Chair of the Community Preservation Committee.
Thank you, Tom. Good evening. I'm Terry Ackerman, Chair of the Community Preservation Committee, and I'm here to talk very briefly about Article 22. The Community Preservation Act revenues come from, I have to go to the next slide. Okay, here we go. A 1.5% surcharge on the real estate property tax bills. There are some exemptions, and the state does match these funds. This year, we're going to be getting a matching rate of 19%. Better than zero, at least. So since 2006, the CPA projects in Concord have funded over $20 million worth of projects. This year, the committee is recommending $1.8 million. The details are in the warrant and in your handout, and it includes $600,000 in recreation, $319,000 in community housing, $520,800 in historic preservation, and $341,619 in open space. And this is out of a total requests of $2.5 million. The first project is the Regional Housing Services Program. Concord is one of 8 towns that's in a member consortium for regional housing services. Half of the funding is recommended from CPC, and the other half from the general fund in the town manager's budget, for a total of $38,000 per year for Concord's share. The next project is Junction Village Affordable Assisted Living Development. This will be Concord's first entirely affordable assisted living development with 83 affordable units and 43 at deeply affordable levels. The recommended funding is $300,000 from CPA. The total project cost is $18 million. We have previously used $1 million in free cash, and I see a typo on that slide. The previous CPA funding, on my copy, it says $700,000. I know that's correct because we've been putting in $350,000 for year 1, $350,000 for year 2, and this year we're recommending another $300,000 for a total CPC of $1 million. The next project is the expansion and renovation of the main library and the Haywood Benjamin House. This will preserve the exterior of the Haywood Benjamin House and do renovations to the interior spaces for ADA accessibility. The recommended funding from CPA is $500,000. Okay, we have that same problem. I'll have to fix these slides for town meeting. The total project cost is $10 million. The other funding sources, a lot of fundraising by the library, $8,950,000. Under Article 7, in the municipal capital projects, we are recommending $550,000, and CPA funding is $500,000. To total the $10 million. The next project is the Timothy Wheeler House at 110 Walden Street. The total for this project is $31,800. The CPC funds will fund $20,800, and the Concord Home for the Aged will fund the other $11,000. And what this project will do is prepare the architectural design specs and supporting documents. It's based on the historic structures report that was done in 2016 for this building. Next project is the Giroux Recreation Area improvements. There will be capital improvements, hopefully the construction of a new park entrance, parking, paved connections to the rail trail, bike entrance, walking paths, blazed trails, and an erosion control system with shoreline dock. So this is year one of a multi-year project. The total might be something like 1.5 million over several years. This year, CPC is recommending $200,000 toward these initial capital improvements. At White Pond, we are recommending $250,000 for accessibility improvements and for renovation of the current restroom facilities. Again, this is only one portion of the total project. The next project is Warner's Pond dredging, which is again a multi-year project. This year, the CPC decided to just fund the first baby step, the $75,000 for permitting, so we can take that initial step. This is a multi-year project that will cost anywhere between $1 and $3 million, so it's going to take a while to get it done, but at least we can get the permitting started this year. And the next project is the Emerson Land acquisition. This will purchase a 3.4-acre parcel of land located between the Ralph Waldo Emerson House and the access from Walden Street. The Emerson Thoreau Amble is part of this, and it also includes a portion of the walkover Mill Brook. The funding from CPC is recommended at $90,000. The total project cost is $200,000. That typo there where it says other funding sources, that is $50,000 from the Concord Land Community Trust. And then we have $60,000 under Article 7 in the capital plan and $90,000 from CPC. So the total to purchase this land is $200,000. Getting toward the end, a few more left. Haywood Meadowstone Wall. This is the third part of 3. We did phase 1 in 2012, the east wall. We did phase 2 in 2016, the west wall. This last piece will replace the bollards at the intersection of Haywood Street and Lexington Road. It's only about 70 feet long. And CPC is recommending $21,619 with an additional $5,300 to come from project administration in-kind services. So the total is $26,919. Old Calf Pasture, the CPC is recommending $5,000 to go along with this gift that was recently received from the Little Women Fund for $10,000 and $2,000 for in-kind services for a total of $17,000. And what this project will do will be continued removal of invasive species such as glossy buckthorn, and this parcel does have the highest population of the state state-listed Britain's violet. So removing the glossy buckthorn will be a big help for preserving the Britain's violet. The last big project is Emerson Field improvements, including irrigation system upgrades, well redevelopment, baseball field and softball field renovations, spray fountain, pathway installation, ADA upgrades, replacing fencing, backstops, and player benches. The CPC is recommending $300,000. The total cost of this project is $1,020,000, and the other sources of funding will be $520,000. Previous CPA funding that we put in last year was $200,000, for a total of $1,020,000. I apologize about the slides. We will definitely have that fixed by town meeting. And our last funding is $30,000 for staff support, signage, legal and consulting services, copying and administrative expenses. So thank you very much, and please vote yes on Article 22.
Thank you, Ms. Ackerman. Next on the...
Tom, aren't we going to have questions?
Oh, sure. Any questions of Ms. Ackerman?
I have one. The improvements to Emerson Field, does that include any improvements to the track? She's shaking no.
It's not listed as one of the improvements. There are that long list of improvements, but it did not include the track. I'm not sure if Rich Raines is here. So we can check and make sure, but we don't think it includes the track.
I have a question about the 300,000 for Junction Village. Can you
Yes.
give us an update on what's happening with Junction Village?
Right. As far as I know, the application went through last year and was denied. They told us to reapply, and that's normal. They say it takes several cycles. So they're right now in the midst of reapplying. I don't know the exact date, but I think it's maybe March. And then we hear back from the state in June or July, whether... Yes, for the tax credits. And then if we're accepted, the project can begin right away.
So this is our second go-around?
Yes.
Thank you.
I have just one question on the last item, the 30,000. That's something that's been in year after year for as long
Correct.
as the CPC has been in place, pretty much, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
That is to fund the staff support and signage and legal consulting. For example, last year we had one of our projects that we thought was ready to go, and then there was a legal issue. So we always have to check all of that carefully.
Thank you.
Diane?
Hi, Diane Proctor, 57 Sudbury Road. Terry, I believe that we've made 2 applications for funding for the Junction Village, and this will be our third.
The third?
This will be the third. And
No.
I've checked.
Okay, Marshall.
So, I mean, we're hopeful that this third one will come
Correct.
through.
Marcia, do you have something to add on that?
Just to clarify, I'm Marcia Rasmussen, Director of Planning and Land Management, and I work with the Regional Housing Services Office. This is the second application to the state for the tax credits. It is the third application to CPC for funding.
Correct. Right. I believe right. I'm sorry. I thought you were, Mary, you were
I was
asking.
asking about the state tax
The
credits.
state.
I was asking,
That's right.
and you answered it correctly.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questioners, we'll move on to, excuse me, Article 10, and this will be presented by Carrie Flood.
Okay, I am Carrie Flood, 1289 Main Street, and will in a few months complete what will have been nearly 8 years representing Concord on Minuteman School Committee. It's been an interesting experience and a significant and positive period of redefinition for the district, of which Concord has been a member since the very start. Excuse me. Our guiding goals include promote excellent teaching. We have set these for ourselves with the intent of serving the needs of our students, local workforce development, and to support the interest of surrounding communities. Of course, it starts with the teachers. Our high school students alternate weeks between academic classes and instruction in the technical field of their choice. While academic courses, hey, come on, there we go. While academic courses will cover standard principles and specific curricula are designed to align with differing learning styles and relate to a student's technical course of study. Success on our standard test scores provides strong evidence that the approach works. Modern equipment and safe practices in labs and shops may seem like a given, but students also develop strong relationships with their peers, faculty, and advisors who are there to support them throughout their time at Minuteman and in years beyond that. Every student graduating from Minuteman leaves with qualifications that qualify them for immediate employment, but typically over 60% will go on to college. The new building remains on budget and on schedule to open its doors to students in September. So this is a major transition year. But there's a lot more good news. Just take a look at this list of recent accomplishments. The last item, by the way, means that our postgraduate programs are maturing and they are tuition-based and will become eligible for student financial aid and loans. Oops, did I skip one? I did. Now on to some facts and figures. Here you can see that while enrollment from our current 10-member towns, that's the tall blue columns, has remained relatively steady, changes in state regulations, however, that determine eligibility have caused a steep decline in the number of students attending from outside the district. Those are the green columns. The yellow, by the way, are the communities that recently withdrew from the district, and you can see that they were never sending a whole lot of students themselves. So, despite eliminating over 15 teaching positions and some administration, the cost per student was rising even before expense of the new building kicked in. The administration and school committees are taking steps to address this, and with a few months left to go, the admissions office has already received more applications for freshman admission than it did in all of last year. New parent representatives will network with other Minuteman families, but will also be available to talk directly with the parents of prospective students. Lisa Williams has been selected to fill that role for Concord. The superintendent is taking the lead on this one, and we wish him luck. We believe that the most effective step, both in terms of governance and budget, will be to welcome one or more new towns into the district, and Watertown is seriously considering just such a move. Here is our own enrollment at Minuteman. Take a look and note that a major factor in our annual assessment is a 4-year rolling average of these numbers. And here's the effect. Our budget share is definitely increasing. After a few years of declining budgets and modest increases, debt service on the building project is coming into its peak years. There's more information on the next slide, but all member communities will be paying more next year. Regular maintenance and utility costs will be down, and there will be further changes in staffing levels, but increases in negotiated compensation for teachers, insurance, and retirement costs will all increase. On the revenue side, Chapter 78 is actually up somewhat, but with a smaller district, transportation aid is declining. And with fewer out-of-district students, tuition paid by other towns is falling as well. With state approval, a capital fee will be added to that tuition beginning in fiscal year 20. However, proceeds will be applied to the subsequent year's debt payments. And the bottom line, while anticipated, is that Concord's assessment is up just shy of 45%. driven in part by the much larger number of students in recent years that are choosing Minuteman, and in part by the new building costs. If anybody has any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. Anyone? It's okay with me if you don't. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Flood. And now, excuse me, turning to Concord Public Schools, Article 11, the Superintendent, Lori Hunter.
Good evening. Thanks for having us tonight. I'm Lori Hunter, Superintendent of Schools. I'll just start by saying what a difference a year makes. Last year standing here a few months in is very different than it feels 18 months in. And the work that we've done, I think we're wanting to really highlight for you tonight and talk with you on our processes, much of which have changed dramatically. In July, Jared Stanton started as our new Director of Finance and Operations. We have literally built all of our budgets from nothing all the way up. So when we say zero-based, we mean that in the most literal sense of those words. We're also here tonight to propose some capital projects that we're hopeful the town will consider based on the needs of what we're seeing in the schools and what we're hoping and looking to provide for our students in terms of facilities and campus access and environments for them. So we'll start with the Concord Public School budget. This is Article 11, as you'll see. So we have put forward a warrant for $39,390,163. I want to talk a little bit about process tonight before we get into the numbers themselves. Jared spent even the months of April, May, and June starting to look at what our budgets were and really learning them. And then we spent the summer and all of the fall working with the building administrators, working with all of our department heads, and making sure that we could completely account for what we would be asking for. So this meant that all those prior documents got shelved, and everyone was required to send to us itemized budgets with explanations as to what they wanted and why. And then they were vetted through the central office and leadership teams, and ultimately the school committee to get before you tonight. What we're proposing here is a level service budget. There are no major programmatic changes with the exception of special education, where we are taking on a concerted effort to look at how we're spending our funds in servicing students and where we're able to save, and in some cases that's focused on the out-of-district costs. We're then providing in-house programming to keep them within district. I'll talk a little bit about that as we get through the list and give you a couple of really positive examples of success we're having. That said, we're meeting the needs of kids, and that's the most important thing. Some of the areas that we reviewed, we looked at legal. We have a new legal firm across both special education and regular education, personnel, and school committee. Our previous hourly rate had been $1,100 an hour with Ropes and Gray. We are now working with a firm that's charging us $210 an hour on the school committee side. Obviously, there are cost savings to that, and we're still starting to see those differences. We began the year with Ropes and Gray, so it's a transition year for us, but ultimately there's assured savings there with no lack of quality. We're very pleased with what these folks have offered us so far. We've reviewed all of our salaries and staffing. You'll see quite a bit of work done, especially in the area of tutors and how we're using and actualizing the support staff in the schools. We've also been, and still are, thoroughly reviewing all of our contracted service work. We're starting to wonder if there are places where you could be doing more in-house rather than paying outside vendors, especially focused on facilities right now. Let me talk a little more on special education, and I'll start again by saying that this is about meeting the needs of kids first. We're just looking at how we can be more efficient and effective in meeting those needs. We have a history of certain populations of students not remaining in the schools with us and going to smaller, more expensive settings. We're trying to recreate some of those settings here so that kids can stay in their neighborhood schools or at least within the local schools and be part of their community. So this fall, we opened an intensive special education classroom at Thoreau, which is currently housing 8 preschool, kindergarten, and first graders. They were preschoolers coming in with significant needs. And we are very successfully working on supplying them what they need for direct service, as well as integrating them into the Concord environment. And those students come from all 3 of the elementary school geographic areas. So it's been a real testimony to the success. We are able to draw and attract some very highly qualified, specialized staff, and ultimately provide environments within the schools that are meeting the needs of kids right within our buildings. I have to stress it benefits not only the special needs child, it greatly benefits our school environment to have an inclusionary purpose and exposure to students of all needs. We all benefit from that, and all of the kids benefit from that. We've reviewed all of our supplies and material lines, so there's little to no increase there, and we have reorganized a number of personnel structures. The one I'll highlight tonight is our central office. I am down 3 FTEs in the central office since I started. From within the highest central office senior staff, we are down to 4 of us instead of 5, and then we've reallocated middle management as well to reduce and consolidate positions, all the way down to staff, support staff, especially in the area of technology, reducing and consolidating. So we're doing better with the same amount or less, and I think that that's the theme that I want to really stress tonight, that this is about using our money wisely, spending smartly, for the same high level of service that we know you are looking for and that this community is looking for. So in that review that happened in the fall, we identified a number of cost drivers, and these would be the numbers that we expected to have to adjust because of set increases. Contracted services, much of this is our special education providers. There were increases there. Employee separation, and I'm going to come to that in a minute. We offered incentives to those at the highest levels of paid teaching salaries to either separate or retire, and we maximized cost savings in doing that, and I think it really was a win-win. We've had a really positive discussion with the teachers and those who chose to participate, and we are definitely recognizing the costs. Salary aids, we're seeing an increase there, mostly contractual. Substitutes, we've done some reallocation. We had been carrying most of our substitute lines within the salary line. So if a teacher went on maternity leave, we would carry the cost of the substitute within the salary line where the teacher was budgeted, making it very difficult for us to pinpoint and identify what we were spending on substitute costs, especially in the long-term substitute situations. So we are now able to identify that. So that shows as an increase. Overall, it probably isn't as much of an increase. We're just identifying it separately. So reallocating, realigning are some other themes that you'll hear through tonight's discussion. The teacher's salary contract for the Concord Teachers Association this year included a double step to align them in parity with the high school teachers. So that is a significant driver for this year's budgeting process at just over $1.1 million. Supplies and materials, we've put some numbers back to what they had been. Again, it's not huge increases. They really were stripped last year when we needed to get to the Finance Committee's guideline, and so we're just restoring them to where they were the year prior. And then in terms of other salaries, those are primarily contractual, whether it be the bus drivers or the custodians, et cetera. So those are our primary cost drivers. You can see that's a total of $2.6 million, just over. So the savings work that we did, and this is the benefit of zero-based budgeting, especially in the first year where you're identifying monies that can be freed up for other purposes or reduced. So legal, and I think this will get bigger and bigger as we go. We were very conservative in lowering the legal number based on the new attorneys. And the rest of them are salary numbers, the non-union and support staff. We've done some reduction of tutors in different positions and other elimination or allocations to shift off some of the support staff to our students. The tutor line, let me talk a little bit more on that. So in terms of looking at that, what we found is a couple of different patterns. One being that tutors had become some of our solution to any and all problems, so that we had been adding staff fairly significantly, and so we've been re-looking at that. We've made reductions in tutoring staff, but I also want to be sure that we qualify this by saying we've just been flushing the numbers out, realigning, reallocating. The tutors were being budgeted throughout the budget rather than in one place. And in so identifying them, we've been able to identify significant cost savings there. Special education tuition, and this is the beginning of what I expect will be a pattern, or hope will be a pattern. As we provide more services within the district, we expect to see less out-of-district costs, depending on the needs of the kids, of course. But we've already realigned and really scrubbed tightly to look at our special education tuitions. We've allowed for a bit of the unpredicted because, of course, this is one of our most volatile areas. One child can have a substantial fluctuation to our costs. But we feel pretty comfortable that we can now having zero-based even the tuition, so we've gone child by child, setting by setting, and really been able to identify what our needs are that we're able to reduce by that $700,000. So our cost savings overall, $1.6 million, essentially. I do want to highlight just the numbers for the separation retirement incentive. This was one of our creative ideas of a year ago, so it happened in 2 phases. Teachers could elect to retire in phase 1, which meant they separated from us June 30th of 2018, or they could elect to participate in phase 2, which meant notifying us this year and separating from us this June. In the CPS schools, we've had 8.5 teachers, 0.5 meaning a part-time teacher, participate last year and another 9 this year. So you can see those savings, and this is with the savings still paying out some of the incentive over time to the staff. You can see we've really maximized the cost benefits there and really made some significant gains in, again, what I consider to be a win-win because these folks all went happily and feeling really positive about the work that they've done while being celebrated and allowing us for cost adjustments that we will now hire to replace them at a mid-level step rather than the top of the scale. So this is where we are coming into tonight's hearing. Last year's budget was the $38.2 million number. The school committee in December has approved the total number of $39,390. That's an increase this year of $1.1 million approximately. And we have brought you a budget just under 3%, which we're really proud of at a 2.99, with especially given some of those cost drivers you saw. We feel really, really solid and really, really sure of where we are at. In talking with the Finance Committee up until tonight, the guideline was set at $1 million, which is 2.61%. And so we still have discussion to be had over the delta of $143,268. And that's our status as of tonight. So I can take questions on the CPS budget. Jared and our Assistant Business Manager, Ian Rames, are also here. We're happy to answer whatever you'd like to talk on.
Dr. Hunter, can I ask you a question about your zero-based budgeting? First of all, congratulations. I can understand how, from your standpoint, finding where assets and resources are coming from and going to is a great benefit. But could you describe a little bit the benefit, perhaps to the taxpayer? That sure. The $1.6 million in savings, was that something that was reallocated to priority areas from your standpoint, or how is that accounted for?
Do you want to answer some of that? Sure.
Thank you. So what the zero-based budget did is we took, I think there was 500 lines, give or take, in the CPS budget.
Jared, could you identify yourself?
Sure. Jared Stanton, Director of Finance and Operations. So what we did was we took a look at every single line, all 500 lines, and we went one by one and just built it up from scratch. So about 98% of the CPS budget that we're asking for, that 1.1 million, is in teacher salaries. So all of the savings that we found, for the most part, we're able to fund that to fund the increases, but as well as fund the double step lane that is in the contract. So if we had not gone through every single salary line, we would not have been able to
The
build
ask
it
would
up.
have been 2.7.
Excuse me?
The ask would have been 2.7.
It would have been
then.
higher, correct, yeah.
Just to follow up a little more conceptually, I think what this is doing is allowing us to be very clear in where the money's going, to be able to share it out in a really specified, individualized way, in a manner that perhaps feels different, at least to us, than it has in the past. And I think we've had some feedback that it has felt different to others. I think, too, that going forward, once you zero base, we're going to continue to zero base, and we will always know where every dollar is going. And I hope that those explanations, whether it be at a big level or at a very individual line item level, then we're going to be able to assuredly answer any questions about whether the taxpayers' money is being spent effectively and smartly. And I'll be honest, a year ago, that was hard for us. We were in a process of a very typical, traditional process of adding on and rolling over, which I've worked with many, many districts that operate that way. And if you don't ever zero base, you're adding on and rolling over without exactly having done that work to be sure that all the funds need to be added on and rolled over to. So we've cleaned all that up, and I think that's the mode we're going to stay in.
Can I follow up with that question? So the zero-based budgeting, first of all, thank you for doing that. I know that was a very difficult exercise, and I'm thrilled that you found $1.6 million in savings, right? And then I just heard that out of that 1.6 million, 1.1 million went towards teacher salaries. Is that correct, right? So then we would expect that there'd still be another $500,000 of savings, right, that we could give back to the town as opposed, but instead what we ended up with is another 1.1 million that you're coming to the town for. So help me reconcile that, where if you find these savings, yes, I understand part of those savings have to go to the teachers' salaries, which are contractual, but there's still some savings left over. Where did those go, and where is the incremental 1.1 million that this budget includes going? Was that in, see where I'm?
Sure. So I think if you look at this list of budget drivers, most of which are contractual, you will see that our total increase here was 2.6 million. So the other 500,000 you're referencing would have been used to offset some of these increases, many of which are contractual. Like I said, the aides, the clerical, the custodial, the bus, all come from contracts that are already settled. We did have some restoration to do last year as well, where we had really desperately tried to get to a reasonable number that we could meet the Finance Committee guideline, and in doing so, we had fairly dramatically shaved supply and material lines and needed to restore those back to what they were the year prior in order to maintain the integrity of what's going on in the schools. So I hope that answers your question, but I think all of it shows in this list as to where the remainder went.
And this is more of a comment than a question. Can you just move Brian for 1 second? Thank you. I can't see the slide up here. You're off from the recommended guideline by 143,000, and you're characterizing this as a level services budget. But your supply and materials line of 420,000 has been characterized as an add back. That's not level services, and we're off by 143,000. Could that be done at 300,000 instead of 420,
Well, let me give,
and get us
sure.
back to the
Fair question.
back to the
One of the examples I'll give, we often are buying subscriptions now. We're in a technical world where we're not just buying hard copy books, and publishers are getting really creative in how they're asking us to pay for that so that there's no cost loss to them. So, for example, our major math program in K-5, which is all of the kids across all 3 elementary schools, is a 3-year subscription. Last year, we were able to reduce the line because the subscription was up this coming year, and that's $100,000 alone of that supply and material line in order to get that subscription back on track. So there are some non-negotiables there. I think to your point, Dean, we asked principals to share with us every rationale for every single thing that they asked for, and really we are just restoring back to what we were. We're happy to share any of that with you. We have itemized lists that go with every line item.
I want to commend both the superintendent and the finance director for the transparency you brought to the budgeting process and the hard work you did on this zero-based budgeting. So,
Thank you.
Congratulations, great job. Just one question. Does this budget include, at one point there was a discussion of having new assistant principals at the elementary school. Does this include?
So that's an ongoing discussion. What we're looking at, we're looking at a little bit of transition happening in a couple of our specialist positions at the elementary schools. So we're considering whether we will replace them as they are in those positions, or if we would look to reorganize and have assistant principals at the elementary schools instead of one of those specialist positions. We're in a really slow discussion right now. We've engaged the teachers. We're looking at what our needs are, both on the leadership side and the student service side, and we'll make a thoughtful decision that will be cost neutral. So, thank you.
Is the early retirement separation incentive program complete now, or is that ongoing?
It is complete. We offered it for a one-time event over 2 phases. I don't anticipate returning to that anytime soon. We think part of the benefit is a occasional offering. The last time it had happened in our schools was 20 years ago. We found the memos that went with it. So it's complete at this point.
Good evening. Ned Perry, 362 Bedford Street. Dr. Hunter, one of the benefits of this run-through, as your predecessor or one of the previous presenters discovered, is having the group look at the slides. I think part of the difficulty of this discussion, and I congratulate you on the transparency and Jerry on the transparency of this process, one of the difficulties on these slides, and particularly on these budget drivers, is there's no historical data. Now, maybe that's difficult with the zero-based budgeting, but I would hope that Jerry would be able to get some historical data for some of those lines, so they're different columns. So, and you did a very good run-through on the explanations, but for town meeting, I would recommend a bit more information. I'm sure the Finance Committee has gotten reams of materials. I'm sure the school committee has full understanding of each one of those line items, but for the citizens to understand the slides, a little bit more information would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, hi, Miguel Chavarri, 255 Commonwealth Ave. I've looked a lot at the budgets, so I want to make 2 statements. The first is I don't think we can understate the work that they've done in order to align the budgets. I've spent a lot of time looking at them, and year after year, you would see that the expenses would not match the budgets. And then even more recently, I would look at the budgets, and the information didn't even match the budget books. So just want to commend you guys for doing that. And then the second point, too, is in order to get that information in the past, it was very difficult to get it from the previous administration. And I do have questions on other areas, but in this area, they've provided everything I've asked for and other people have asked for, and that's to be commended as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Miguel. Ready to move on? All right. Article 12 is an annual article that correlates with the town manager's capital plan. So we are putting in this year with a suggested number of $900,000 from the finance director. I want to preface this a little bit because it will lead, it's a little bit of a precursor to the middle school discussion we're going to have in a couple of minutes. We've been really looking at our capital needs and reworked the entire 5-year capital plan. I think the good news out of that plan is the 3 elementary schools are in very good shape. We have heating and energy needs that need to be addressed. We've decided to take a year's time to look at what other opportunities we have to fund those projects through green communities and some of the other sustainability efforts that could be available to us rather than request any of those. We have definite needs that will be costly to upgrade those systems in at least 2 of the elementary schools. By putting that on hold, it then allowed us to step back and look at the needs at the middle school and at Ripley. Similar theme, Ripley's going to be some costs coming down the road here. We've got a really old boiler system, as well as a number of major other infrastructure needs that we've sketched out in the 5-year plan, and we'll be bringing forward, expecting we can do much of it within the typical allocation. This year, we've decided to focus on really 3 main things, one being the desperate need for a new phone system at all of the Concord public schools, the second being some security upgrades, and the third being the environment of the middle schools as our kids are experiencing them right now. And I'll talk on what is needed there. That's foreshadowing to some of the rationale for why the article for the feasibility and schematic design has gone forward, because we feel the need to be sure we're addressing both the current needs, because the kids that are there are only going to be there for these 3 years. All those other discussions won't matter for them while we make our longer term plan. So this year we're suggesting that we break out the 900,000 this way. We actually have bids in for a new phone system. Truth be told, at this point right now, our K-8 phones are just completely unreliable. We have a damp line that when it rains, they frankly don't work. You lose calls in the middle of the call. You hope it was someone you're already friendly with and not an angry person. It needs to be fixed. So we're making that our biggest priority here to make sure that we have a reliable phone system. We'll be able to do a better job of connecting it with the high school system and rebuild our infrastructure. Security upgrades, we're going to be looking at installing additional cameras at Thoreau and Willard. We have very minimal cameras there. We did put some camera work into the Alcott School last year so that there's more accessibility there to being able to see outside from the inside. And a day and age of 2019, with all of the talk and work we do on school safety, it's important to us that we have more than the couple of cameras that are at the front doors and a couple around the perimeter that allow very minimal, if any, ability to really see what's happening outside. Then let's talk on the middle schools. So what I did not do this year, which is a little different, I've combined for the most part, because the work that we want to focus on is the same, with the exception of one area across Peabody and Sanborn both. Every year we put a contingency in the capital article of $50,000 per school for whatever unknowns happen. We always spend all of that on hope that it's going to be enough, so we've put that in again as a placeholder. This fall, we are going to be opening Peabody as a grade 6 building and Sanborn as a grade 7-8 building. We're very excited about the opportunities that's going to give us for horizontal connection and collaboration. All of the kids in one grade being in one school is going to have a great deal of benefit to us. It doesn't solve all our problems. We've created another transition, which is not typically your first choice in education, to have a one-year stop like that. But we think given what we have to work with, this will alleviate some of the current issues. In that reconfiguration, we need to be sure that we have equitable space available to what especially the 8th grade staff had at Peabody. So we've had to put in a third science lab at Sanborn, so that work is already somewhat started. The big work will have to happen this summer. I'll preface everything that almost all of these costs are inclusive of asbestos abatement because of the level of asbestos we have to manage whenever we do anything in the building. We are certainly compliant and always managing it, but any project comes with that kind of cost factor. The other thing we need to do at Sanborn, again, for equity to make sure we're giving access to the educational experiences the kids have had up till now, is rework an art room and make sure they have, frankly, just make sure they have enough space for the 8th grade bodies in a room that would now be too small. So we'll be doing some minor reconfiguration of a wall at Sanborn there. You can see the rest of this really is about the aesthetics and the wellness of the school. The rugs at both schools are very dated, give or take a handful of classrooms that we replaced a number of years ago. Major strips of just seams that are pulled up that go from one side of the room to the other side, stains and such that are how many decades old. We really need for wellness and health and just feeling like it's a great place to learn, to be sure that we've replaced those rugs. That does come with an abatement cost as well. And then we'd like to just freshen paint up across both schools. There's quite a bit of space that a fresh coat of some really bright colors is going to make a big difference in how the room feels or the setting feels for the next number of years while kids are occupying those schools. So we have decided that needs to be a priority for us and at least put that forward as a request. So that rounds out the $900,000 for this year. We feel solid that this is the bulk of money we'd be looking to put in the middle schools. You'll hear some of the what-ifs that sit next to that discussion, but we feel like this would be how we create a really maximized educational environment for the kids that are experiencing it right now. Again, this is part of the town manager's capital plan, so it's complementary to those projects as well. Questions? Phil?
Thank you. Phil Swain, again, from the Finance Committee. As much as I appreciated your budget for CPS, I don't see this really feeling like zero-based budgeting. It's the same number as last year, 900, and I think we've been funding it at 900 for the last few years. So I have a few questions about the spending, but I will point out $670,000 for the middle schools is a tough thing to accept when we're going to be asking for a brand-new middle school in a minute. But anyways, is the telephone system a landline system?
Currently, it's VoIP system, so we need to upgrade it because right now it's working off of the older lines.
So it's going to be replacing what is basically a landline system with another landline system.
No, we'll be going to voice over so that we can then do it over the wireless, and all of our voicemail will go to email and all of that greatness that the high school already enjoys.
That's good. My only other comment is, it's not on your slides, but you did mention Ripley, that there's going to be some major renovations there. The thing that we saw earlier in the fall was about $2.8 million in upgrades at Ripley. And it reminds me of the question we've been asking. Is Carlisle paying its fair share for this? Yep. Are they paying their fair share for the bus depot and the other expenses of running the district?
Right. Let me answer a little bit of that. One of the reasons we held off on Ripley was part of that conversation, as well as the sustainability discussions. We will be bringing forward to an upcoming joint meeting the discussion of the bus depot and how we're managing our costs over there. Right now, we are not charged rent back through the region, which was part of the discussion prior to the construction of the depot. We've resurrected memos of 2012 where Carlisle acknowledges that would be something they would be open to discussion. So we are going to have that conversation before this fiscal year is out at the regional school committee level. I think we're going to have to talk on logistics and structure because how we manage the Concord side and how we manage the Carlisle side, but it all needs to go through the assessment. So it's on the radar for sure. Just a little preface on this. We work very collaboratively with Carrie's office on this number of 900,000. So it may not feel as zero-based, but we worked really hard to make sure that it was within the scale of what the town thought was a doable number to reach. So in that regard, I feel like it was zero-based. We did start our capital plan from scratch for CPS this fall, just after we got out of the zero-based budgeting process. So I think we feel really confident that we know what our priorities are and what our long-term needs are.
Can I ask a question about an upcoming budget? You mentioned that there are HVAC issues at a few of our elementary schools. Can you just elaborate on that? Because that can get very expensive.
It can, yes.
Those are pretty new buildings, so
right.
I'm that concerned.
So the energy units, and I'll offer Ian and Jared to hop in on this, the energy units at Thoreau and Alcott are both not highly efficient nor highly effective at this point. They're older units that if we were able to upgrade would do a much better job at being cost effective and heat efficient. And right now we've got units that are pulling cold air in constantly, so we're continually cooling the coldest air rather than any recycled air. Parts are continually going, so we're replacing pieces of ERU units. So there's I think 15 years is a lifespan of that kind of a product.
Okay.
Do you want to add to that?
Jared Stanton, Finance Director. Yeah, they last anywhere from 10 to 15 years. We have had some that actually have lasted less than that. This year, I believe, at the Alcott School, I believe one was about 7 years old. So we're identifying these, putting them on the plan, and hopefully we can get them fixed.
Any other capital questions for CPS?
Miguel Chavarri, 255 Commonwealth Ave. On the CPS phone system, is that across all the schools?
All of K-8 and Ripley.
Okay, so that includes Ripley as well. And then
It
you
does.
said that there are discussions with Ripley with regards to Carlisle and such.
There are.
correct? And the resolution on that probably won't be happening.
Well, we're going to start with the bus depot and the conversation of operating costs
Okay,
there.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, Article 13. So this is a fairly straightforward housekeeping request of ours. You'll see that it's referencing the use of school property funds. As of right now, any usage of the schools by outside groups that we collect rent from, actually, we don't collect the rent's going to the town general fund. Which means that what we're asking is to have access to that money directly so that it can go right back into the facilities. I've often seen it in other districts where it's used for maintaining the wood floors or other parts of the actual space in the school that's being used where the rent is coming from. So a little bit of fact to go with this request. This is not an account we can create on our own. It needs to be a town meeting approved account. Average annual rental revenue has been about $15,000, so we're not talking huge amounts of money. The rental does not include custodial costs. Those are paid directly by the party who's renting the building, so those do not go to that's why the number is relatively low right now at $15,000, because custodians are paid directly for any overtime or additional cost incurred there. This would allow us, like I said, to upkeep and maintain the space, generally the space that's used by the outside groups. And right now it's becoming part of the town's general fund. So we are asking that the town create this account for us that allows us to collect the rental fees directly and allow it to go back into the schools. Any questions?
Lori, how much is that per year?
15,000.
Oh, 15, okay.
Okay. All right, great. And this is the last and the most significant, in some ways, I think, in terms of information we want to share tonight with you. So I'll beg your patience while we try to give you an overview of where we are at the middle schools and why the request is coming forward tonight and into town meeting. And there's a lot of moving pieces to this, so hopefully we can give you a lot of information in an efficient amount of time. So this article is requesting $1.5 million. And this $1.5 million would be used to fund feasibility study. And I want to qualify that because those words get used for a lot of different purposes. So feasibility study means there's a review of the site in order to determine where and how a new school would fit on the site. And then it would immediately go to the next phase of schematic design, is when a larger scale conceptual design is drawn of what the new school might offer us, and then be thorough enough that it would inform the cost of that new school. What it does not include is the detailed design, which is very significant and substantial, and that's where you're getting architecture for every classroom and every space within the building so that it actually can become part of the construction plan. So we're short of that detailed work, but we're going to get all the way to the place where we have a really strong conceptual piece of work that then informs what the full design and construction costs would be. The other really important piece of this $1.5 million is the project management side, where the owner, which would be the town of Concord, hires on a project manager who pretty much immediately takes over the process and begins to own and operate that process under the town's supervision. Clarity, you'll see here, we're talking about using the site at Sanborn, building on the field, demolition eventually of Sanborn itself. Peabody then becomes a discussion of an asset available to the town because the schools would not have a need for it. So just clarity, we're talking one school on the current Sanborn site with demolition on the of the current school and the fields rebuilt on the current school site, very much like what happened at the high school. So that's what we're here talking about. We want to give you a big picture overview. We do have a time-sensitive challenge related to both schools. You'll see the age of the schools are both at 50 years or better. The buildings, the infrastructure, equipment, everything's beyond their useful and reliable life. We're literally unsure of what might happen next, and that concerns us greatly, and we'll give you some examples through the discussion. An important part of this discussion is why we're doing this now the way we're doing it. We have applied twice to the Massachusetts School Building Authority to request consideration of subsidy, and we have been denied both times. And we're going to give you some data on MSBA and its process and its likelihood of funding. We would not be proposing any of this without MSBA support if we thought there was a strong likelihood of them changing their minds. We've worked with them 2 years in a row now and essentially had the same answer, and I'll talk on how they make their decisions as we get deeper into the presentation. So these are the choices we're at, and I think as a school committee and an administration, we felt the need was to bring it to the community to have the discussion, given what we see in the schools and the limitations we can feel. So the risk is to reapply and risk being declined again, which means a year from now we're in the same exact position and another year's worth of time has gone by. Or we start to talk about moving ahead without MSBA. Just a little history in town. 3 of the current schools outside of the middle school, the high school, Alcott and Thoreau were MSBA supported. Willard was a non-supported project that the community did fully fund. So the questions are going to come down to cost and control. Self-funding is more expensive. We'd have to acknowledge that without the subsidy. We've done quite a bit of work, though, in looking at the risk factors as well as the cost of construction currently. And the more time goes by, the more you could end up losing some of those savings. Waiting for MSBA is risky. We don't know what's going to fail next. We have major infrastructure in both schools that is 50 years old and showing signs of that age. We know MSBA has a lot of guidelines and regulations, so we do think there's some independence that is beneficial in doing it by ourselves, and we can give you some examples of that. And we're trying to give you another dive deep so you can really see where the rationale is coming from, because it's not a warrant article we've put forward lightly or without a lot of real reflection. So just a little bit of where we are status-wise in the middle school discussion. We have not designed a school. We did work with Feingold Alexander 2 years ago as an architecture. This money was approved out of the capital money that we just looked at, out of the town manager's budget, to do some assessment of both buildings. And we'll get into some timeline and history there. That was meant to be sure that money was not spent in the money pit that these buildings could become, and we knew, the school committee knew, and the administration knew exactly what the logical plan would be, whether to support millions of dollars of fixing infrastructure, or whether to look at other options. And we have to preface all of this. We don't have a design. All we have are data points that we can pull from other sources. So we're looking heavily at the MSBA data that's available, looking at escalation projections from MSBA, which are really based on actual costs of other schools in the Commonwealth, and looking at what we know are costs to the best estimate possible, short of putting out bids for replacing roofing, plumbing, septic systems, things like that. So we acknowledge right up front there's a lot more we don't know than what we do know, but we've tried to put together as informed an opinion here as we could. So we're going to talk you through each of these highlighted areas. The first thing is to just give an overview of the history of the two schools. Sanborn's 55 years old, Peabody's 49 years old. you know, if you're really intrigued, it's a pretty interesting story of what each building was built for and what it ultimately ended up being used for. Peabody was designed as an open concept elementary school back in the early 70s when the walls went down in the schools and doors weren't, and kids were gonna free flow place to place. It then never opened as such. It immediately became overflow to the crowded Sanborn building as a middle school. So it's been a work at retrofitting right from day one. Very challenging, and we'll get to a couple of the examples there as well. Just in terms of work that's been done on the building, the most recent in both schools has been the boilers replacements in 2014 and 15. Those were asks at town meeting. Green community money then subsidized those projects. And we have done the work to now show that the two replacement boiler systems together in the time since those happened 4 and 5 years ago can total over $500,000 in energy savings. So those were smart decisions at the time, as hard as it is to hear now that those really beautiful boilers, which are some of the prettiest building rooms in those buildings, might be on the discussion table. But assuming you've got another 4 to 5 years in the schools, that's another large amount of savings, and certainly supporting the energy work we all believe here in town. So a little bit of what's happened recently, and by recent I mean 3 years. So this has been a conversation the school committee's been having, and I repeat it as a second-hand knowledge, not firsthand, having lived it. In 2016, the Facilities Planning Committee was formed. They met, they reviewed what some of the options were. They worked with Feingold Alexander and the questions of what would it take to be current for 10 years, what are the options and estimated costs, and what are the options and estimated costs for a new school. That's what was answered in the findings, which are posted online. Feingold Alexander in the spring of 2017 reported that conditions were deteriorating. Things have been well maintained. You would not have students in 50-year-old buildings if we were not maintaining them well, so that's a credit to this community that that's been the operational mindset. They're just simply at the end of the lifespan. MSBA will say it's a 50-year life expectancy in a building, and that's the goal that you're setting. We do, you know, we've just talked about reconfiguring the two campus piece. It's challenging and it's inefficient. We're going to show you some numbers. It's expensive. Current situation's a struggle for the community. We know there's limited factors in teaching and learning right now that we aren't able to maximize in these two spaces. So we want to be sure that we're advocating for the best optimal experiences. Education is changing so fast. The 10-year outlook from Feingold Alexander was that it would be a cost of between $34 and $47 million to remain in the schools. And I always qualify that by saying, I'm never going to be somebody who says, please let me put $34 million into those two schools, because I feel like it's not the environment we want our kids to stay in educationally. And I do have concerns that you'd fix one system and then another system breaks, and where and how do you make those decisions? So that was the point of the study, was to make that recommendation that we decide whether that was the prudent place to put those kinds of costs. And really what they were reporting on, if you were definitively going to stay, you'd have to start putting in some of those changes. When we look at current conditions, we know we're operating fairly inefficiently. In a minute, we'll show you a slide of totaling over $500,000 in utility and redundancy, just because of the efforts to duplicate, whether it be heat or duplicate of some staffing across the two schools. We have outdated infrastructure, which continues to be a problem that loops right into the aging equipment and how we maintain and even repair. We are overcrowded. We have mods at Sanborn for 6 classrooms worth of space, and we have educational shortcomings. So you look here, we've totaled it up, and on a conservative amount, we can see that we're spending $548,000 per year to maintain the 2 schools. So one new school would have a fairly immediate impact on the operational budget, just because of the work we can do to consolidate. Outdated infrastructure, here's a list of many of the different systems that we are continually monitoring and struggling with. The roofs are at the end of their life. The heating lines, we had a leak at Sanborn a couple of months ago where the radiator pipes had just corroded and the leak went into the science supply room. So that once we got in and looked at that, and you start looking at the plumbing and realizing that the plumbing to the radiators is that corroded throughout the entire schools, it is a little nerve-wracking to think that that could happen at any point. Septic has been our more chronic issue. We've just relined this main septic line at Sanborn because it kept clogging and backfilling into the school, up through the restroom floors and into the hallway. We evacuated 5 classrooms. Thankfully, it was a Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock. I will be forever grateful that that's when it happened, making that reassignment of kids fairly painless and cleaning of the building over the weekend, and we didn't lose a minute of instructional time, but project that on a bigger scale. It's very concerning. And I'll let you read the rest here. None of it's probably all that surprising in terms of asbestos, mercury, and the monitoring of some of those environments that we have to do. Neither building has sprinklers, and you can see by looking at PWD, there's some concrete issues there. Everything's essentially original except for the boilers. No backup generator if we lose power. Parts are becoming a challenge in these dated systems. I referenced the 3 mods at Sanborn. So those are purchases that were made by the town to manage the overcrowding there. We do have kids out in those mods. There are no bathrooms there, so the travel is a concern for us. We've had to get creative with our security so they can go into the school to use the facilities. Plus, they're out in the elements, there's delays in travel time, those kinds of things. We've gotten very creative with our space usage to make sure we're maximizing it. Custodial closet this fall was converted into a learning space. Not ideal, obviously. If you haven't been to the Peabody Cafeteria, we'd encourage you to come experience the lockers and tables all in one space. And if you really want to enjoy it, you could do it at lunchtime when there's one grade eating and another grade coming in to get their stuff. It's we've got a lot of routines in place, so it goes fairly smoothly, but it's very congested and crowded and not at all what we would hope for in a middle school environment. I could do a whole presentation on the educational shortcomings. In 2019, we can't teach the way we've been teaching. We need to be looking at project-based, inquiry-based, hands-on, authentic, collaborative, creative ways for kids to be learning. We actually found in Mr. Cameron's office this afternoon, I don't know what he was cleaning this weekend, he pulled up the pamphlet that was the PR for the Sanborn building when it was going to be built. It was built as a junior high, and we're trying to run a middle school, and we're doing that right now in a junior high and an elementary school. So in a middle school, we'd have team pods where there's sections of each grade level meeting and having the same space in the school. And right now we don't have any ability to do that, so that teachers are really collectively collaborating around the same group of kids that they all share. Interdisciplinary learning, we want to be sure we're getting across the curriculum because life doesn't happen in 42-minute chunks of science and then 42-minute chunks of math. And some of this is going to be our long-term work to do, but we are really limited in what we can do in those 2 schools. Highlights of process and timeline, I'll just reference a couple of things we haven't talked about here. With the way the facilities planning group worked, it was just after the boilers had gone in. So I think there were comments made that when the boilers were approved at town meeting, that we might have a longer life at those schools. As we started to look at the capital plan that existed, and we've resurrected that plan and studied it over the last month or so, the plan was to start significantly investing in these infrastructure upgrades. And from what I can glean from the school committee records and the presentations we reviewed, the discussion was, wait, before we do that, let's be sure that's the smartest plan. And that's when the 2016 study was proposed, and that's why the discussion maybe shifted a bit from what it had been in 2015. And then with the rejected 2 SOIs, statement of interests that went into MSBA, this is where we find ourselves in the winter of 2019. A little bit of the MSBA process, and I'll talk at a really high level here. It's a competitive process based on urgency and need that is a clean slate every year. So they will validate our need. They have said that to me. They will come out here and say that to all of you. They validate the need. and they will validate that what we reported is what they found in the schools. What isn't happening is bubbling us all the way up to the top in a competitive environment of 70 SOIs being submitted this year and only 12 projects being funded. So we've done the percentage work over the past number of years. The last 3 years, the percentage of funding has been under 20% of schools that have applied. The year prior was 25%. So just statistically, this is a challenge. We've done some other work to look at districts that applied again and again and again. Burlington's applied 7 or 8 times and not been funded. Dudley Charlton's applied 11 times and not been funded. So there's no magic formula to how many times you put in. It's all about who else is in the pool. We are seeing patterns of large urban high schools being funded, which the MSBA is allowed as 1 cent on the sales tax dollar, which puts them at about $550 million to $600 million a year. If they fund a large urban school that has a much higher subsidy rate, they can quickly find a quarter of that money going to that one school. So there's a lot of moving factors here in terms of the MSBA process. And so here we are, not having been invited twice. A little bit, if it's of interest to you, because this is how you spend your free time like we do, this is who was invited in this year. You can see it is a range of districts. A little bit of what we want to offer you, there was a rating system updated in 2016. The state reviewed every school again, either physically or with what they had already for documentation. And they rated it on those last 3 columns: building condition, capacity, meaning enrollment, and general environment. You can see all of the schools that got funded this year were rated a 1 for general environment. Capacity is whether you're exceeding their percentage of utilized space. Even though we've got 6 classrooms and mods, we still were rated an average. I'm sure without those mods, we wouldn't have been an average, but because we'd rectified it, we were. And then the building condition, which really is the one you would think would be the driver of who gets funded and who doesn't, you can see is fairly widespread. 1 being the best condition, 4 being immediate, urgent, emergency repair needed, and then 2 and 3 in between. So it's not a direct correlation as much as we all wanted it to be. Sanborn and Peabody have been rated 2s. The answer I got when I talked with MSBA was that there's a big range of 2s. There can be low-level 2s and high-level 2s. And really, when you read the definition, it's about the fact that we're functioning, our programs are operating, our buildings are functioning with a fair amount of need for infrastructure replacement. And then they just keep changing the degree of need as you get to the 3s and 4s. So we did the math here. 85% of the schools this funded this year of those 12 were in category 1 or 2. And then this is what happened in 2016, just a little bit of information on how they rated the schools across the Commonwealth. You can see the majority are 1 and 2s. Very, very few were rated 4. So we were in that 2 category. A little bit on what we've tried to put together for project costs. So you have to make some assumptions to be able to get to cost drivers. So we've been looking at what MSBA has put out for average cost per square foot at $648 per square foot. Feingold Alexander suggesting $125,000 square foot building would be around our target. You do that math and it's about an $81 million building. We know that there'll be some cost increase. We've been looking at the cost growth year to year and what MSBA has funded, and that is a startling almost 7% growth from 2010 to 16. And so we ended up using a number of $90 million based on all those factors in order to come up with some of these other calculations. So in terms of what the tax impact would be, it would average for the median household tax impact at $764 based on those conditions. Estimated peak year would be just over $1,000 at the offset. And so median tax bill based on median household value would be at almost $12,500. We do think there's some cost to waiting that we want to talk about. The infrastructure failure risks, if the heating systems were going to need to be replaced, we'd be up at $1.1 million to do that, we expect. The roofs at both schools are of concern, and those costs total between the 2 schools at $4.5 million, And the septic system, like I mentioned, we just put $20,000 into the Sanborn system. Remember that contingency money in the capital article? We expect it would be $300,000. So fairly quickly, you can total up over $6 million worth of potential projects that could happen. We're going to keep Band-Aiding them. That is the plan. But if at some point you decided the Band-Aid was not going to work or the need was too great, you'd be looking at some of these major costs. So then in an attempt to calculate the cost of waiting, there are a number of assumptions we've applied here. One is that we would actually, so we're going to reapply to MSBA. I know that sounds counter to the rest of the story I'm telling tonight, but we will. We can talk about what that means in a minute, but that alone would mean you're a year out from acceptance just because of the process. 2-year delay to project completion because they stretch the timeline out based on their process. Escalation of cost, we saw 7% in the current MSBA numbers. We didn't assume it would be that high. We know it could be lower, maybe 3%. We've been talking with a lot of project owners, project managers, and hearing that they're afraid it could be higher given the cost of different things. And so then if you try to put all that together, you start to see that the escalation cost of just waiting because of the cost projections and how much they have been increasing year to year on a $90 million building could be between $5 and $15 million. Operational costs reflect back to that overlap of the $548,000 of redundancy that operationally we know we could reduce. And then we would be able to eliminate that $200,000 in contingency that we've been carrying in the capital articles, $100,000 per year approximately, but over 2 years. So you can see those numbers get big fairly quickly that start to make you wonder if waiting ends up really being as savings as it would sound when you're waiting for MSBA to subsidize. A little bit more on MSBA, the reimbursements based on our wealth factor. That's the Commonwealth's term, not ours. Baseline reimbursement rate was 34% for the high school. A lot of things are not included in the reimbursement rate, though. So if you want to do things that aren't included in the reimbursement rate, they sit outside of that total, and then the effective rate drops. So for us at the high school, that meant it dropped to under 30% to 29%. Middle schools, they typically under MSBA have limitations on the size of the gymnasiums. They don't allow for auditoriums. You have to build cafetoriums where the cafeteria has a stage. Things like that become restrictive. And we would so then expect a reimbursement rate to be 18 to 22 million. We then start to feel like that gets eaten up by the cost drivers and the risk factors that sit waiting. And so reference again to the timeline picks up in pace because if we self-fund, we have control over it. And by we, I mean the town. This is a town building project that would be overseen by a town building committee that would be formed essentially immediately should this funding be approved. And so there'd be complete control by Concord. And then we have to question whether there's savings there given the other drivers that we've aggregated and been able to compile. It certainly begged the question that we felt we needed to bring to the community. So that's a lot of information. There's a lot I didn't cover. So we're happy to take questions. We've got other facts we can share if they're of interest, but I wanted to be respectful of your time tonight.
Just one question.
Sure.
Did you guys do any work around the correlation between what they're going to fund, what the MSBA is going to fund, and the wealth effect?
We've anecdotally done that. So MSBA would emphatically say that it's not a factor. When you start to look at the schools that they're funding, you question that a bit, I suppose, because you do start to see more districts in need in terms of their demographic. There's no hard way to correlate it because they're emphatically going to state they're not a political entity, and it's completely based on the comparison school by school and the need. That's the best answer I can give.
Even though they deny it, and maybe it's true, I'm just trying to understand, is there any data that allows us to sort of say, anecdotally, we could be waiting 11 years, based on your comments? before we even actually get a credible
Right.
pass.
I'm going
So-
back to the list. So if you look at the list, you can see there are some districts that probably have some. Brookline was funded. They did not get accepted for their high school project, but this 100-year-old school was funded this year. So I guess that's good news that MSBA is funding the 100-year-old building. So you can see a range is there. The only way to correlate it would be to tally up how many projects every community's had and try to do the data analysis that way. I think you're going to see enough questions that pop, like we've had 3 funded projects, so that starts to negate the wealth factor discussion a bit. So we could do that work and bring it to you to see if it's telling.
Excuse me. I have a couple questions, but one on the MSBA. I just went to their website and I got a list of the towns that are being funded. And I know that the list you're showing us is last year's funding, but if you look at the list of projects that are in the works currently, you get Wellesley, Westwood, Acton, Boxborough, Newton has 3, Belmont, Manchester, Essex, Lexington, Needham, and that's just a short list of the projects. Wellesley appears twice, so there are wealthy towns that are being accepted.
There.
But my question really is, as much as I would love to see the town build a brand-new middle school, I think it's a huge ask at this time, given the context, because the context is we are approaching our peak debt in 2022 for the other projects that we funded. And that includes the new high school and the Willard School, which was funded with no MSBA funds at all, probably one of the most expensive elementary schools in the state. And so we're not even peaking on our debt until 2022, 4 years from now, 3 years from now. And we were told at each step, as we generously funded these projects, that we weren't going to need a new middle school. So I went back and looked in 2011. The school committee said no significant project at the middle school. The FinCom reports in 2014-15 said the middle school will be able to operate for the next 15 years. And then I think you were referring to a 2015 town meeting where the deputy superintendent, the finance director, came and said, and this is important because I think you have acknowledged it, but I think you have to acknowledge what he actually said, which is, I've talked to the facilities manager. So the facilities manager knows the condition of the buildings. We know the buildings are in good shape, and we believe that with proper updating and capital investment, they can operate for 30 years. So that's the context of what we funded all these things, and that representation was made in order to get us to spend $500,000 each on the new boilers. And I understand you did say we got some reimbursement from Green Communities, which is good, but still, you have to come back and say, despite what you were told, something has changed, and you have to explain what the change is. Because, we've relied on these statements in funding these other things.
Right. I think my response, I wasn't here. I'm doing what I'm watching videos and reading minutes and trying to gather the history that way. My take on what I think the intention of the statement was, and I feel like there was a missing piece, because when I look at the capital plan that was on paper when that statement was made, there were millions of dollars allocated in those coming 5 years to the middle schools, which I think perfectly parallels what Feingold Alexander said to us, which is you can stay in there a long time if you want to sink millions and millions and millions of dollars in. I think probably a new set of eyes and Mr. Cameron and myself, and really reflecting on what we're able to do and not do in those schools, as well as, potentially failing infrastructures. We're having scares along the way here, when septics fail, and I think our message probably heightened the urgency a bit to say, before we get to a point where we have to spend millions, let's look at where we're at, and then MSBA adding to that timing to not fund us. Wouldn't we all wish that had happened and we'd be here having that conversation instead of this one? So I think a combination of all those pieces existed, but the 2015 capital plan certainly showed there would have needed to be investment there. I think our question is that money wisely spent? I don't personally think it is.
So just one last comment. So I will point out, if you hire an architect to ask whether you should build a new building or renovate an existing building, an architect is usually going to say you should build a new building. So I think you need to ask hard questions about all of those recommendations, and I think the town has to think very hard about whether they can afford to add to the debt that is already peaking.
Sure. No denying it's a big ask. Absolutely.
Maureen Kameza, 28 Davis Court in Concord. My concern is not so much with the MSBA funding or not. It's kind of a prior question. When I read Article 14, what I see there is a question about a feasibility study, but implicitly it is greenlighting the building of the new school at our own expense. So I feel that in a certain sense we're approving the feasibility study, but implicitly saying, yes, let's go ahead and build that middle school. And one of the reasons why I feel uneasy about it, in addition to the increase in my taxes, which would represent a significant increase for me and many others, is that the Feingold report, as I glanced at it, gave two alternatives. One was build a new school, and the other was to put an addition on Sanborn. And in the presentation, which was very persuasive, we don't see anything about that second option that Feingold Alexander presented to you all. What we see is their opinion that the two buildings would be unreasonable, continuing to maintain the two buildings. But you haven't set before us the option of putting an addition on Sanborn School, which would cost about half as much as building a new school. So if we're going to rely on Feingold Alexander, I think it would be more transparent to really let us know what Feingold Alexander offered as reasonable options.
I can answer a little bit of that. So the facilities committee that was reflecting on the work of Feingold Alexander made a recommendation to the school committee not to go with either of those options. I think cost effectiveness and learning environment wise, there were concerns there. To your point though, maybe saying that would be a helpful piece of the discussion so people could hear the process.
I think it would reassure us that the process is really transparent.
Sure.
And not being driven by talking points
Sure.
only.
Yep.
So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Just to clarify one quick thing, I believe the Feingold report said to replace the building would be $68 million, and to put the addition on would be $60 million. So it wasn't that big of a gap. And the other big thing is again, it was not a feasibility study, it was a facility study. So big difference in what Feingold would do compared to a full feasibility study.
Louis Salami, 68 Great Meadows Road. I actually was the vice chair on the high school building project. I worked closely with Stan Durlacher for 6 years building the project, and not that I want this on my tombstone, but I think I'm the resident expert on the MSBA in the town of Concord. I lived there for quite a bit. And if you go back and think about how Concord got the $27 million in funding, we actually got lucky. Tim Cahill, who was the treasurer in 2010, actually was driving by Concord, and we happened to be on the list, and he stopped by, and we got the funding. I would argue that we got the funding as a campaign contribution, and this is essentially why it happened. And so somebody could argue with that, but I'm pretty sure that's exactly what took place. And so if you think about the MSBA and their public policy, I think it's fair to say that Concord, the box has been checked. So my own view is, the school district has applied 2 times in a row, and has been rejected 2 times. They've tried, and it's not going to happen. And so that's the first point I'd want to make. The second point is, in terms of cost escalation, the high school was a $92.6 million project. At the time, that was a showstopper. If you actually use the numbers today, the project is $170 million, and that's since 2015. So that just shows you, what has happened to construction costs since the high school was built. When the project was being built and the bids were coming in, the window was actually shutting, and we got our hands stuck a little bit, but kind of, were able to get most of the subs in at a fair amount. And there's finally, on the build, on the renovate and add, if we had done that in the high school, I still think we'd be going in place. That building, the high school, and the Sanborn building, or Peabody, whichever the addition is going to go on, is loaded with asbestos. And I can tell you right now that if we had done the Reno Ad project, it would have been way more than $92.6 million. You cannot do a project of that scale with kids still in school because there's asbestos flying everywhere. So if you were to do it, you'd have to have mods built next door to the building, and that cost alone will eat up all the projected savings of not building new. Thank you.
Yuval Ehrlich for South Meadow Ridge. I would like to actually 3 points to what Mr. Swain said. The first thing, I think that one of the biggest mistakes in management is to perpetuate past mistakes. The fact that in the past there were declarations and there were analyses that proved today not to be correct does not mean that we will actually have to perpetuate them, because that might be an extremely expensive exercise in the future, and we have lots of examples both in history and in management. The other thing, Mr. Swain actually concentrated on the facilities cost, but the superintendent, who is the highest authority, actually made another point, which is actually at least as important to the residents of Concord. She was speaking about learning environment, and she was categorically saying that the current buildings cannot provide us with the adequate learning environment, and definitely will not be like this in the next 10 years. There's no question that Concord will need a new middle school. The question is when. So the other option is to now stay and put 34 million in best case scenario in the next 10 years, and then build a middle school that will be way more expensive. So I suggest to amortize this now and not wait. The other thing, there was a slide that showed the cost per household. This slide is a mistaken presentation, I think, because it speaks only on the cost of the new school, but it does not deduct for it the cost of maintaining the $50 million or $35 million of the next 10 years. So if you deduct it and add the cost of waiting, there will be actually almost no cost.
That is not true.
Good. Yeah, you should.
Charlie Blair, 26 Florio Drive. I think so many people here that we've been through this a number of times with different schools, and we're all trying to remember how that did work, and there was a lot of different opinions. The one question I had as far as the MSBA, and I had brought it up when we were building the high school, and also with Willard, was the option of doing a model school with the MSBA, and I didn't know if you had worked that out with the 2 proposals.
So we looked into the model school program. We're all aware of what it used to be. Things have changed some. They no longer incentivize you the way they did to go to a model school, and there were percentage points offered or added to the subsidy in the past. What they've now done, if you go on their webpage, it's a much broader bandwidth of what they're considering model schools. And really, they're meant to be a plethora of options. When I was meeting with them, Jack McCarthy said they actually found that there were districts that built model schools for those subsidy cost savings, and actually they found the model school not to be the right fit to the community, and they wanted to eliminate that. So it's not the same program that it was. It does offer you opportunities to look at what other schools have done and potentially use their design, which could save money down the road, but it's not exactly the same dollar for dollar cost saving driver. I think they've reflected on that program a bit and tweaked it some. That said, I've been in a lot of different model schools. I can't see any reason why we wouldn't look at some of those options. There's a lot of really great buildings that were built under the model school program. So.
The other thing that I had a concern too is, I know you've done work on the septic, and would we have to go down that road again with the septic? Is there any way that we could tie into town sewer?
That's a fair question, one that we'd have to pull the water folks into and talk on.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. John?
Does the MSBA assessment include a qualitative description of the physical plant of the schools, or is it just a numerical scoring
No,
system?
you're required to do an educational visioning work and submit that as part of your plan for what you're going to want to offer for educational programming in the new school.
So is that public? Is their assessment of the physical plant a public?
The 2016 work that they did, you must be able to get all the way to the building level, correct?
Yeah, I believe you have to ask for it.
Yeah, they publish it in a chart form, sort of like what we showed you, but I'm sure on request they would give us what they had for each school.
Ed Perry, 362 Bedford Street. While you're looking back into the 2010 and 2011, 2012 Finance Committee reports and town reports, I would invite you to go back another 10 years. It's my recollection that town meeting was faced with an article to rebuild the 2 elementary schools for a total of about 68 million. It got a little bit higher than that. Town meeting didn't accept it. We then rebuilt individually each elementary school for about the same that we were looking at originally for 2. So I would encourage everybody to look at that history, and we don't need to go to other towns. We don't need to go to the MSBA. Just look at our own history and see the cost savings from moving forward now with a concrete proposal rather than pushing this off and getting longer.
I did look at that. It was 68 million for 2 elementary schools and a brand-new middle school. And so that's, town meeting voted for that, but the polls, they turned it down at the polls.
Miguel Chavarri, 255 Commonwealth Ave. On the model school, you would save on the architectural fee though, right?
You probably would, yeah.
So a $90 million building, you'd save, what, $8 to $10 million?
Do you have a guess on the architectural fees? I don't think we are sure. We're open to looking at that, and it would be a town building committee discussion, so.
I did notice that the architects didn't put that in the Feingold report. Clarification on the 1.5 million, so if we were to approve this, the school committee would not have control in this money, it would be the town committee?
So the town building committee would need to be formed under the auspice of the town manager and the select board, and membership would need to be identified. There'd be certainly school committee representation.
Of course,
Hopefully they'll invite me to sit in on it.
The control would be a town committee.
Yes,
Because
completely.
my impression was it was going to be a school committee.
No.
Project, which,
No.
Okay.
No.
So just one quick comment though, words do matter. In 2015, we were told, actually it wasn't at the town meeting, it was that this hearing here, that, the schools were in good shape structurally. And that with investments, and they did identify the $6.5 million investments, they will last another 30 years. And then you look at the MSBA, and they say that they rate the schools as being in generally good condition. So, but by 2017, before you came, then all of a sudden we needed new schools. So words do matter, and it is confusing. So, at this point, I'm not sure what to think. I actually went to the middle schools there in Peabody, You know, as I know you must have been a Sanborn kid, right? Oh, okay.
Be with you, buddy.
Anyways, I went to school with your brother. But yeah, so I can easily believe that the schools do need repair. So I was going to ask you guys to vote no confidence on this, because if it was a school committee, I would have to say, I would probably say vote no, but it is going to be a town-run committee that this money would be feeding, so I would be more inclined to support it at that. But thank you very much.
Cynthia Rainey, Hunters Ridge Road. So just to follow up on that, the warrant article says under the direction of the school committee. So is that just semantics, or that's what's a little confusing to me?
Yeah, so
Does it need to be reworded, or?
We'll check with our council. That's the wording that we were provided. That's the typical MSBA wording.
Yes.
So we will double check it, but it is a town committee, and if the wording needs to get changed, we will
And that
amend
said,
it.
I know that you're very clear on that it's going to be a town committee, but would it be possible to put some basic timeline in the presentation? Because I think some people think this is just, you know, feasibility study, and then at the next town meeting, we'll decide if we're going to go forward.
Right.
So I think that's a thing that would be helpful to people. You know, we're going to have to vote at the polls, and then June, we would start this endeavor, and what the, you know, would it be
What the
coming-
future timeline looks like. Believe it or not, we have about 30 slides that we
I know.
didn't bring you tonight. But it's helpful to hear what you'd like to have for information.
Think many people are persuaded that this is the right thing to do, and they're just not really clear on what we're voting for.
Sure.
To go forward.
Yeah, we can clarify that. So what happens a year from now if the schematic design and feasibility study are complete is that would be brought forward with a proposed cost to build, and that would be a vote required of the town a year from now or whenever it's complete. We'd hope for a year from now. That might be aggressive. So. Thank you. These are great clarifying questions. Is that it? There's a lot of information sessions scheduled. They're on the school's webpage, so you're welcome to keep coming if you want to keep talking about it and see those 30 slides we didn't show you tonight, and be sure that everyone feels fully informed when they go to town meeting. And then there will be a subsequent ballot vote as well. Okay? You ready to go to the high school? All right, so this is the high school operating budget. Obviously, it's a shared budget with Carlisle, so we're going to continue to talk Concord's assessment all throughout it. In the warrant, you can see the total numbers of what's been approved by the school committee. I will start this presentation by saying we have met the Finance Committee's guideline and been very collaborative in getting to that. So I'm here to share facts with you as to how we got there. Again, the zero-based budget, I'm not going to go through all of those. We did the same process at the regional budget as we did with the local budget. The big distinctions, though, at the regional budget are some of the other cost factors, which include OPEB, post-employment benefits, which is always a significant discussion for us, our excess and deficiency account, which is our stabilization account at the region as required and allowed by law. I will throw in some of the others that we didn't put here: insurance, health insurance, and the increases to that always have to get managed through this. All of the things that the municipal side manages at the local budget, we have to incorporate into the regional budget. We're going to spend quite a little more time on OPEB and E&D because they became fairly significant conversations in this budget process. This is the list, and I won't go through it very specifically as to what we had for budget drivers. A lot of this was reallocation and realignment. Because of last year's budget process being so tight, we had actually done quite a bit of work making this zero-based process fairly smooth and a little simpler than it was at the Concord level. Each department head has their own section of the budget, so we were able to ask them to trove down deep. So you can see here that essentially staff and contracts were our biggest drivers. We had some driver for the employee separation, which was an overall savings. I'll show you that slide. I will spend a minute on the software hardware. We provide laptops to our students in grades 6 through 12, actually. We've had a really steady budgeting plan for the middle school that we have not had in place at the high school. The high school program was created without as stable as a fiscal discussion. So we've been trying very hard to rectify that, to make sure that we've got a continual process that maintains the structure. We don't want to get into a position where other districts are, where they Band-Aid it and Band-Aid it and Band-Aid it, and then, 7 years down the line, they need $500,000 in capital outlay that they hadn't planned on. So we're trying to make this a stable process. Our big discussion was about leasing or buying the laptops. We've decided and done the work to show that buying, as you might expect, is cheaper, a little more front-loaded with cost, but you're not paying recurring interest fees. Cost savings, like I said, we had done quite a bit of work in the regional budget last year, so it was a little less extensive. We really fine-tuned our transportation costs with the late start time. There had been some contingency monies in there just to make sure we had everything operational. We were able to take a good portion or all of that out. Reallocating tutors, special education tuition adjustments to total the $320,000 in savings. I'm going to note, and I pulled it out of the actual savings line, but the debt on the high school is reducing year to year, so that does reduce the assessment to both towns because the debt continues to go down. This was our total separation incentive savings over the years. Less teachers participated, but there are less teachers available to participate, so we still significantly were able to realize some savings through that program. OPEB became a big discussion factor and has been at the regional level for the last number of years. So our current fund balance as of June 30th, 2018 was this $3.7 million. What I wanted to show you tonight, the discussion became about whether we're trying to reach the ARC, are we at the ARC? If we're not at the ARC, what's the long-term plan? So you can see in 17 and 18, we funded $705,000 and $735,000 to OPEB. Pretty significant numbers, not quite at the ARC, but pretty close. We are among, if not the top funded regional school district in the state right now in terms of OPEB savings. We've done some work with the other regions to dipstick what they've done. Acton-Boxborough has similar numbers to ours for a district almost 3 times the size. Other regional districts have 0 to very little of this figured out. So we're in a really healthy place in OPEB. The goal is to remain healthy while we consider other factors, and I'm going to get to a couple of those in a minute. 2019, this year we ended up at $600,000 to OPEB, and then for the 2020 budget that we're discussing tonight, we landed at $563,000. And there was a reason for that. We had funded it fully up at the 785, and that certainly had us at a much higher percentage increase. But we had a lot of work to do in looking at the use of the E&D account. So we had grown accustomed to a habit of using E&D as a revenue source. So that's using your stabilization as a revenue source and really depleting it faster than you're putting in, which to all of us is just common sense, not good practice. So the goal this year was to shift that pattern, and we wanted to do it at a pretty substantial rate fairly quickly because in November we heard from Moody's that our rating was going on the watch list with a negative outlook because of our lack of stabilization funds and the decline that continued to be the pattern of using those funds. We had quite a bit of conversation with them because what we wanted, or what we thought perhaps the argument was, with that kind of OPEB savings, was it as much of a liability to have E&D not as stable? And the answer from them was E&D was by far the bigger concern. OPEB matters, but not as much as having the stabilization funds available, which I think makes common sense as you think about it, but we definitely needed them to outline where the priority monies were needed to go. So, and it's to some extent, we were funding OPEB and sacrificing E&D, and that needed to be the tide that we turned. So through the zero-based budgeting process, and I do think this process was a huge impact on why we were able to do this, We were able to manage those cost drivers, utilize that bit of savings, but still reduce our reliance on E&D for revenue down to $350,000 from the previous years of $700 and $689. So we're pretty proud of that, because that means hopefully a year to 2 years from now, we're going to have zero coming out of E&D for revenue. We will see a quick turn with Moody's, we think, because you start to realize the positive trajectory immediately once we go in this direction. The goal will be not to use E&D as a revenue source at all over the next 1 to 2 years. So this is where the assessment calculations landed, and we do try to break it out so both communities can see the difference with and without the debt. The number that ultimately is usually being talked about is without the debt, because that's the operational costs. So you can see we collaboratively worked with the Finance Committee and reached a 4.44% increase, which is $850,000. Carlisle, you'll remember our story of last year, some of you, with the enrollment shifts, which will always be part of the conversation. Carlisle, because Concord had a slight enrollment shift last year, they're now this year seeing a bump up where they'd actually seen a deficit decline last year. So their number's up higher than Concord's, and for an overall operational increase of 4.73%, which includes a fairly healthy OPEB contribution, a reduction in E&D, and management of all the cost drivers. So we're pretty thrilled with that, because if you take some of those big cost drivers out, you're at a really fairly reasonable percentage increase operationally. And so that's where we are in the regional budget. The story simplifies once we've made our way through those processes. And any questions, comments? Okay. All right, one more to go. Another regional article, and this one I expect we might have some conversation about. So, we've spent the last number of years looking at the high school campus. So the building opens in 2015. The landfill, you lived that saga. The landfill's finally remediated, and the school committee collectively decides with the administration that we want to step back and look at the usage of the site. Before we just do something quickly on the landfill, we better understand what the needs might be. We better understand the complexities of that campus, which are deep and vast, and that we don't quickly make one project at the exclusion of another down the road. So we'll talk through the history of sort of how that process happened. What's the driving discussion here? There's two main portions to this $2 million request, which is shared between both communities. One is to finish reconstruction of the Loop Road, access road that goes along Beatty. If you've driven that, it's in terrible shape. We actually reimbursed a townsperson last spring for a pothole that really did damage to their car. We're Band-Aiding and patching. It never happened at the end of the building project, and it just desperately needs to upgrade the lighting, clean up the sidewalks, all of that. The other discussion that's really become a predominant one for me, high school principal Mastrullo, and the folks living in our school, the students and their families, is the lack of available parking. So we're bringing that forward as advocates for what we see as a need, and want to share with you some of the data that supports that we're really looking to see if we can get back to where we were in the old facility. It's not truly additional parking. I can talk a little on sustainability and some of those other pieces that go with this, which we believe in and value and want to instill in our young people. But culturally right now, we have something that's taking an extraordinary amount of time to manage, creating an extraordinary amount of anger and hurt feelings, and just taking away from what we're trying to do for our kids in our high school. It sounds crazy and ridiculous, but if you lived with the Principal Mastrullo and I and saw what was happening with our families and our kids for a week's time, you'd see just how much of a distraction it is. The week before break, I went to the Parents Association meeting. It was the front topic. While they all sat there and wondered if they were parked in some kid's space and who they were stressing out, we had 3 different families complain. Kids crying, literally crying in the office. I mean, the amount of stress it's creating is very, very challenging to manage, and it was time to propose a solution. So that's what we're asking. We'll get into a little detail on how we got here. So as I said, the funds are for the roadway and parking back to previous amounts. So the access road is obvious. You all know where that is. We worked over the past 5 months. You remember I was here for special town meeting discussions and then you didn't fund it, and we did the study. So this is the study that we funded without town meeting support to help us know what the capacity of the building, of the campus was. So they reviewed all that was on our list and identified what they saw as the priorities, the access road being the top one, there's just no question. So that whole way from Thoreau to Walden Street being repaved and put back together, they don't know quite how deep we're gonna have to dig. So these are really conservative numbers. I'll start by saying we think the 2 million is the maximum. We expect it to come in lower. We just can't give you what that number is without going out to bid. So we need to address the roadway. The other job that they had was to try to figure out how some of the other items on the campus advisory committee's work the year before, where we gathered input from the community, could all fit on the campus. Could it all fit? So there was a discussion of a track that is down the road in the future, most likely privately funded, parking being a huge, the priority that popped, and then some educational needs, looking at outdoor classroom space and greenhouses and some other factors. The one other piece they looked at was the amenities building that I know has probably been a discussion in this room at different points, that the Memorial Field Stadium right now is not compliant with state code for access to the bathrooms ever since the new school opened. So we have an issue that will need to get rectified at some point, and those plans are getting made. So the proposed area for the parking, as you can see, that is the landfill space, just to the lower side of the access road. The parking would be proposed to be adjacent to that and overlapping that to some extent. The goal, and the architects have shown us that it's doable, would be to leave space for a potential track there down the road. We have looked to move the skate park up to the upper portion of the campus. It would really benefit from a different space. It's really tucked off down the hill, really not being used. So we want to give that a new life and bring it up top. And that is what we're talking about tonight, is those two main spaces. So Gale Engineers are the folks who did the work for us. I'm not going to go through all of the issues on the roadway. Those are some of the most obvious, damaged, cracked, potholes. They're not sure what's going on underneath. That needs to get looked at in the sidewalks. Pictures, in case you haven't had the pleasure of driving your car over the decrepit roadway. And so to bring it into compliance, we would need new gravel subbase, compacting of it, paving of it. Reconstruction would include new curbing, making sure we have all the maximized amounts of ADA curb cuts, lighting, and drainage improvements. And this is a really conservative number, and frankly, a little sticker shock value here for all of us at $1.2 million. Again, we think if we were to do the parking as well, we'd have some economy of scale that we can't capture unless we go out to bid. And this is worst case scenario. It could be that if there's less underwork to be done, it could be less than this. We're going to keep saying that without being able to give you a better number, which is probably a little frustrating. And so then we get into the timeline of where the parking question comes in. The new school opens in April of 2015, demolition of the old building. The old parking lot stays in use. November, the new parking lot comes online. The old parking lot closes in remediation. At this point, the campus now has 135 fewer parking spaces. And I'm just going to put a little asterisk, legal parking spaces. There's lots of illegal parking going on everywhere that we don't have now. So that's an anecdotal factor that we can't totally quantify. So this is sort of where a graph of where the spaces were and where they are now, looking to show you the delta. The proposal is to restore 104 of those spaces. That's what our engineers say can fit in that space I showed you adjacent to the landfill. we've tried an awful lot of things. Many different strategies were tried. There was a decision in 2015 to wait and see. Let's open with what we have, see if it can be adequate. I think there was some hope, I'll be honest. I think there was some hope from the folks who were in the room who were there that we would curb behavior and that the demand would not be there. That is just not how it's played out. And we've resurrected some presentations from the high school administration who was there at the time saying, it's not gonna go that way. Here's what you're gonna have if you don't put some more parking in. And as I read the slideshow from November of 15, it was kind of eerily telling as to the world we're living right now. We did move the faculty up to the upper parking space by the Doug White Field, so most of them are parking up there now and walking, trying to open up the rest of the lower parking lot as much as possible. Last year, we tried to work with our neighbors and rent spaces from Beatty, which if you're a Beatty member, you know that didn't work all that well because we clogged up the Beatty parking lot and we had kids well beyond the ones that were formally assigned those spaces in, and we've had to really work through some issues with Beatty and the assistant town manager's office to stay in good stead there. So that failed. We numbered all the spots, which in theory holds everybody accountable to be where they were assigned. Kids pay for the spots, so we thought that would help. But what it's done is just add another layer of stress because kids are grabbing other kids' spots. If somebody's not there that day, they might park, but we have an open campus, so it might look like you're not there for the day, but you're actually just down at the center of town and you're coming back and then someone's in your spot. We've stressed the adults out because as they try to park and there's not sufficient visitor parking, they might grab a spot. I parked in a student spot last spring, came back to find a sticky note on my car that said, "You're in my spot." So it just perpetually hasn't fixed it. And now we even have this little underground, so the juniors have no parking. We've just told them in September, juniors are not gonna have any parking at all. So what that has bred is this underground black market that we have kids selling spaces to kids. So we've tried an awful lot of things and we're not solving it. There was a carpool challenge promoted by the high school green team. We're in communication with them and working on our sustainability efforts at the school level with a newly formed committee. It's just not that simple. If you get your license at 16 or any time within that first 6 months, if you're under 18, you can't drive anyone but a sibling, which I don't know, it's maybe questionable as to whether the sibling's a better bet than the friend would be for safe driving, but they can't carpool with anybody else besides a family member for 6 months when they're first licensed. So lots of things that make it complicated and things we've tried that haven't worked. This is the timeline of the discussion that's happened. The Campus Advisory Committee was the first subcommittee of the school committee to talk on it. This fall, we had a Campus Oversight Committee that worked with Gale Engineering. Gale then does the feasibility study in the months of November and December. And now I've formed a Campus Sustainability Committee because we do believe in the bylaws in this community and want to help promote those habits in kids. It's just not something to turn on a dime, and it takes a lot in 2019 when this is where the kids are going. I met with the green team at 7:15 in the morning. They weren't on a bus. They got brought or drove to school. The kids are there because our kids are so invested and have so much extracurricular opportunity that they are actively engaged in. The buses don't work. The late bus is an option for some kids, but it's a very challenging schedule for them to make work depending on how the clubs meet or the coaching schedules work. Maybe they have an after-school job they need to go to. We actually have some sports teams that don't practice, obviously, on the campus. The hockey team cannot practice on the campus. Some of the others can't practice there because the site they need is not local. So on and on, our kids have a lot of different things they're participating in, and that's what's driving this discussion. So we've proposed 104 additional spaces. People are going to ask me if that's going to fix it. I've been asked. The answer is it's going to be the only option that we have. We're going to have maximized the site for what environmentally we're going to be allowed to do there, if we even get the special permit to go back to 22% impervious surface once the design work is done. So the goal would be to restore that back to the 22%, get the 104 spots, and then the conversation's over. We're going to have to manage with what we have. The site is maximized. Estimated cost, again, very conservative, of $790,000. The unknowns that are there are part of what's driving that with drainage and water management. It's sitting on the public water supply adjacent to the campus. We want to be sure we have funds to adequately and sufficiently manage all of that. It would not impede on the track proposed potential down the road. And the amenities building is actually on the other side of the campus over at the Memorial Field, so that's certainly not impacted. So the total request is $2 million. It's just a little bit over that. If you total up those cost estimates, we expect it could be less. The split between the assessments would be $210,000 per year for 10 years for Concord and $69,000 for Carlisle if the $2 million holds. And so that's the total of those two requests. I'm happy to take questions, comments.
Assigned parking?
Yes.
Do students get? Do they pay for that?
Yes, there's a fee of $300. Kids pay for having a parking spot on campus. Right now, only seniors are participating.
And the building that we're not in compliance with on the sports field, there's nothing in any of this.
Right. So we're keeping that on the within the 5-year plan, most likely next year. So that's a complicated project. The state code would require, because of the capacity of the stadium, the code would require that we put 44 restroom facilities in this building, which is excessive. So there's a process that allows us to apply for a waiver with the state to reduce that in half. So we're going to be actively working on getting all of that squared away before we come forward to ask for money, because we don't want to ask for an unknown amount of facilities until we're fairly down the process with the state.
Hi, Nick Pappas. I happen to be chair of the Climate Action Advisory Board, and you're expecting me. Let's see. Yeah, sure. Thank you for acknowledging the town's goals related to greenhouse gases and such. You know, it's been a big thing, and the town has very aggressive goals, thanks to bylaws passed at the town meetings. And so when I became aware of this, this particular article, the first thing I did is look around to see what documentation I could find for it. So I went and I found the Campus Advisory Board's last May's recommendation, and it did mention parking. I was disappointed at that time to see there really wasn't any quantification of the problem. There wasn't any analysis. There wasn't. You touched a lot of those points today, so thank you for that. The town's long-range plan that was adopted also touches on this issue, and I'll just quote two parts. Section 4.5 on mobility and transportation, Goal 2, Action 4, encourage and incentivize carpooling in town, including high school students, to reduce the amount of traffic and congestion from the high school. Goal number 5, Action 1, develop plans to decrease the demand for parking by giving visitors and residents new ways to get to businesses and services, including cultural, historical, agricultural, and education, without bringing a private vehicle to each stop in their journeys to and within Concord. The Climate Action Advisory Board is going to discuss this at our March meeting and take a position on it. Right now, there isn't enough information that I feel we can come to a well-reasoned conclusion. It would be good to see something like a parking management plan that articulated some of these things, that investigated what's been explored in terms of meeting the town's goals on climate action, as well as the parking needs and all of the emotional distress that's causing. There's got to be some sort of a balance. And I could look at what you said and said, well, you're going to make it a little bit better, but you're not going to, unless you just create a lot more parking than 104 spaces, you're not going to stop all the complaints. So
Well, I'd like to, tomorrow afternoon, there's a district sustainability committee at 3 o'clock at Ripley. You're welcome to come. I have representatives from Concord CAN and Concord on Tap and a whole number of other organizations, so we'd love to have you there. That group is just forming, and we're trying to really corral all of the different sustainability efforts at the schools. And tomorrow's discussion is actually goal setting and what we want to accomplish.
This is a personal note. It has nothing to do with the Climate Action Advisory Board. But I'm afraid sometimes what I see is people in Concord and other communities, they're willing to throw money at the problem, but they aren't really willing to change their personal behavior and lifestyle very much. And I'll just leave you with that.
Yeah, no, and I am going to respond because I've been working a lot with Kate Hanley, your sustainability director in town, and she's got quite a vested bunch of research about how the behavior is harder to change than the ideals. And that's the work we're going to have to do together. You're completely right.
I have one
Sure,
comment,
do.
and that is your charts show that there's a difference in terms of the number of spaces that are available today versus what was on the previous campus. One thing you might want to take into account and try to characterize in terms of a hard number is how many spaces were used by the bus drivers who used to park on the campus, because that's where the bus lot used to be. So those spaces were not student, and they're not there, they're not being used anymore. So there was a small give back that when the bus lot was kind of pushed off the campus.
Thank you.
Quick question, just as a point of clarification, you had mentioned if we theoretically build and expand the parking lot, we will have an increased number of parking spaces for people, but we will still be in the dilemma of not having enough. Is that
to some extent?
fair?
You know, we won't have enough spots to park every junior who's going to want a spot.
Right.
That's the
but
bottom
we're
line.
still going to. You're going to have to relive this conversation at some point. So we've just thrown $2 million at a problem that's not going to get solved.
Yeah, it's a different conversation, though, when we've maximized all the options that we have. I absolutely think it is. There's environmentally no other way to add additional spaces. So at that point, we're done with the conversation, and we will have to work with the community on how to make it manageable.
Fair. So arguably, we could be done right now and just deal with it, right?
We've tried that approach. That's not working. I
Because
think
I'm
once
kind
we
of
take...
curious to understand, like, what is a child crying about in your office?
I mean, I'll answer that, and then anybody who wants to share. They're trying to get to a place that they've committed to participating in, and the only way for them to do that is to be able to drive themselves at the end of the school day to that environment without an option to have a space. And by taking this 100 spots, and for the most part it will go to the junior class, the kids age into driver's license over the course of the year. So it will take a good edge off of this issue. Without an option to park, they are now desperately trying to figure out what they're going to do. They're parking on Laurel Street. If they get there early enough in the morning, that's negating the late start time because they're getting there and sometimes sleeping to make sure they can park. They're hunting all over in the local vicinity to try to make sure that they still get where they need to go. Or it's creating stress on families to have to try to manage the transportation that they have to then arrange because they've got kids going in so many directions.
So juniors can't take a bike? They can't bike to and from their homes, or?
Well, they're
I'm just trying to
often coming
understand.
in the dark if it's getting there in the morning. There's a lot of complicated factors. If we had bike trails everywhere, I'd be the first one to tell them all to take their bikes.
I have a question.
I had a question. Sorry. Grace Hanson. There's a number of articles here. Oh, by the way, thank you so much for doing all this work. And I am new to this committee, so excuse me for asking what may be a silly question. But there's a number of articles here all asking for money for the school, each in different chunks.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell me what the total amount that you're asking for over and above your budget is for this next year?
Above the budget, so it's the you'd have to add it up. $2 million for the high school, which is Concord's share of the $2 million. And it depends on how you want it. Some of it's borrowed money, so it's going to be spread over a number of years. $2 million, 1.5 for the middle school study. Yeah, it's the $2 million for the high school project and 1.5 for the middle school.
Right, but I'm including all these additional amounts that you're asking for in relationship to the school. So when you add up Articles 10 through 16, what's the total amount?
Oh,
that you're
inclusive of the
asking?
budgets?
The capital.
Oh, including the budgets?
Yes.
We'd have to get the calculator out and do that. No denying these are big asks. I wouldn't argue that point with anyone. I think
Right, I'm
we're
just
here
trying to
trying to be
get-
sure the needs are presented.
Right, understood. I just want to give the public some perspective on what the total
Yeah.
amount is that is really being presented to them, because it's being chunked up, so it's hard to sort of get a sense of that.
They can have it for you in a minute while they're
Okay.
calculating.
I have a question while they're adding. Just,
Sure, Peter.
just curious, and this may not be possible, and it's probably a lot more expensive per parking space, but did you ever look at doing elevated parking in that
We
area?
did.
In between?
We did. We have had some conversation of
Yeah.
parking garage or something like that. It's an expensive
Yeah.
endeavor, yeah. It was on there. It's on the list.
I have a quick question.
Sure, Mary.
If you don't get the special permit you need to build the 104 spaces, then what's your backup plan?
Then we'll hope to pave the road, and we'll have to just go back to the parking discussion.
So that will be the end of the conversation as far as...
For the moment, it would have to be the end of the conversation, yeah.
So I want to commend you for seeing a problem and trying to do something about it. But you're right, this is a problem, a hard problem to deal with because, again, what we were told. So we were unequivocally told 2 years ago that there were 30 more legal parking spaces in response to a question asking to compare the number of parking spaces. Now we're hearing there's 135 less. So that's 165 off that we were told. And we're told that at a time when there are articles pending that could have put buses at the high school. And instead we ended up spending $4 million to put a bus depot in West Concord. So I do think you're trying to address a sincere need, but I think you have to figure out how you're going to address what we were told 2 years ago. And then apart from that, I just have one other comment, which is, I don't know the numbers. The Gale study that I see has us at 1.065 for the road and 400 something for the parking, for 125 space parking.
Right, so we pushed on them because we needed these numbers, that they brought us the report before it was final. We saw it as it was evolving. So that's one of the older versions. The final version is online, so we'd have to make sure you got that.
And then I know from my years of experience on the Public Works Committee, Nick Pappas was, if he's still here, was on it too, that you don't need to spend $1 million to build a half-mile brand-new road. That's even for a brand-new superhighway like Route 2 that has 80,000-pound trucks. You can just get by with a mill and overlay on that road. And I could go through and nitpick all the things in the Gale study, but I think you can get by with half of that. And I don't know what the parking lot cost would be, but I think it would be far less.
Well, we're hoping
$700,000.
We're hoping it's less, for sure. Yeah.
What is this breakdown per parking space?
Per parking space, do we have that number handy?
$7,900.
Per parking?
Yeah.
What was that, Phil?
And I just want to qualify that the number is so high much because of the drainage and the watershed issues, and we want to be sure there's plenty of money to manage whatever needs there are there. That's really what's driving that cost up so high.
Hi, Diane Proctor, 57 Sudbury Road. Given the discussion tonight, I wonder if the way this warrant article might be presented is in two different parts. One for the access road and one for the excess parking, allowing the town to express its feelings and its will in relationship, and perhaps giving you the leverage to say, I'm sorry, the town won't add parking, that's what we have. So, I mean, I just wonder if we could somehow address that as a possibility. Thank you.
We had that discussion at considerable length at the school committee level. I don't think it can be changed now. But that said, there's always ways to amend articles if needed on the floor. You can't create an additional article. That's, I think, the issue.
Miguel Echevarri, 255 Commonwealth Ave. How many parking spaces total, if we were to build this, would there be?
430 4, 5.
Is there anything wrong with taking the fees, a substantial portion of the fees that the students pay, and apply it to the debt?
Yeah, we could certainly have that discussion. Right now, those fees are offsetting some of the operational costs of other things, of security and some other things that we do.
What are they paying in fees right now?
$300 per spot.
So if we went to $400 per spot, did $250, or just do, round up the number to around $200, that would be like $20,000 per 100 spots. That would add up year after year. So it might be nice to see what those numbers are. I have no idea what
Yeah,
the
no, we've
operating
had
is.
early thoughts of that. We haven't fleshed it out, but we certainly
Because that
could.
would definitely help me in this determination
Yeah.
on this too.
Okay.
I want to just get back to the whole thing about words matter, all right?
Indeed.
Because I was part of that town meeting, was very contentious, and everyone, the citizens were very concerned about the parking. We were telling the school committee that there was not enough parking. And they came back, and the town meeting, they came back, and they told us a very couched answer. It was there's 30 new legal parking spaces, and we all knew it was BS, but, that was their stance, and they took that stance. In the meantime, over the border in Carlisle, the building committee was telling the select board there that there was more parking. They didn't elaborate at all, except for they went on later on to say that, yeah, juniors, it's just a privilege, and that was the position of the school committee back in the day. So it's just like with the inconsistencies with the CMS facilities, it just makes it very difficult, to know what the need is at any given time. I mean, I do think there is that need, but it's really frustrating for us because we told you guys there was a need, and then we were told specifically at a town meeting that we were wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about as frustrating as it can get. And so now we're here, sitting here looking to pay another $2 million.
Understood.
It's very frustrating, but thank you guys.
Wally Johnston, 1479 Main Street. I'm a member of the school committee, but speaking for myself, but with significant knowledge about the situation. When I first came on the school committee, the whole bus transportation issue was at the peak. We had the parking issue that's been talked about a great deal tonight. I was an advocate at the time for the amount of parking we had and figured out, use the bus more. I'm much more well-informed now, both because I've had 2 girls go through the high school, and I've been on the school committee for 5 years. The thing that hasn't been mentioned tonight that I think is important in this discussion, this number is this number because it is absolutely the last amount of space we could hope for the town to approve from an environmental standpoint without going up. And I don't know that that's a feasible thing. But the crux of the issue for me and why I have come around on this is that we have a stress problem at the high school. We ask a lot of the students. We have looked at this every which way possible. Is it parents? Is it college? Is it teachers? Is it students? We're trying to address those things, and everything we would do would be incremental at best, but we're trying to do those things. The amount of stress this parking issue, this 100 spaces, puts on the student body and the faculty and the administration is exponentially greater than any of those other single things we're thinking of. So if we want to reduce the stress levels at the school, this is the simplest way we can make the biggest impact in what we're dealing with right now. And I think that's the critical thing to think about as we try to decide whether to approve this article or not. Thank you.
Yuval Ehrlich for South Meadow Ridge. Maybe just a tool to add that will make it more appetizing in presentation and maybe answer some of your concerns and my concerns is that to create a plan to encourage families to buy electric cars or small smart cars and actually share spaces, because kids are driving to school in Toyota Sequoias and Chevrolet Suburbans that takes 3 parking space of little electric cars. So maybe to capitalize on what you're saying and what the gentleman said about fees, maybe you should actually scale fees as well. If somebody's driving an 8-cylinder Chevrolet Suburban, 10 times the fee of an electric car, that might actually create an incentive, and it would be nicer to present to the public in Concord as well.
We've had a lot of that talk. I'll just preface my personal concern that we be sure we don't create an equity issue. Kids with cars often aren't the ones selecting the car, and I wouldn't want to penalize any of the kids for choices their parents are making. I hear your point, and we want to incentivize and motivate, but we got to make sure we do it with the balance of the kids. Yeah.
Hi, Julianne Cancio, 36 Bristol Hill Road. Just a couple of questions. I have been following this whole process from the beginning because I live right against that field. So, question about the parking, the design of the parking lot. I see in the graph where you put it, but is it paved?
Yes.
Okay, so it's not a gravel lot.
No.
It's lit, it's paved.
It's lit and paved.
It's got drainage.
Yes.
Into.
That's why the cost is so high right now, because all that would have to be designed so it's adequate and going to be
So it has
effective.
to be that type of a lot to serve the purpose? I mean, a gravel lot is much less expensive.
We've talked through a lot of these different options. Without design, it's a little bit hard to answer, but
No,
gravel
I'm
has its
asking
other
because
concerns
the
because
cost is
some
what-
of the oils from the cars can go through to the watershed. So we've done early vetting of all those, but what we would be getting now would be design money to be sure we could vet out the best option for the best efficient,
It's a question
effective cost.
because of the question about the cost and how it might be separated, at least for a temporary time, because like everyone is saying, maybe it's not enough, and maybe something else might have to be addressed to get more down the road somewhere, and if you can solve a problem for the least amount there and maybe use it later somewhere else, it might be, something to think about. And also, as far as the lighting on the parking and the roadway, I know there's lighting in the parking lot of the Beatty Center because my house is lit all night with just that lighting, but if you put more lighting along there, you have to consider the conservation lands and the turtles that walk across
Sure.
the road when they see the lights. The more you light it, the more they come. So, I know there's a need, but you do have to consider that. So when you do present it, the reason I'm saying all of this is describe it, because that will make a big, have the discussion to be more clear for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maureen Kameza, 28 Davis Court. At the risk of asking an obvious question, will there be parking along the access roads?
There is parking along the access road now. We have assigned spots along one side of the road. The road's not wide enough to do both sides. We investigated whether we could widen the road, but then you're into the watershed space there for all the drainage. So that would probably remain as is, with the one side that's parking is available
Okay.
for parking now.
So the leg of the access road that goes up the left access side, is there already parking there?
Once you're going up towards the school?
If I'm at the Beatty Center and looking at the school, the access road to my left allows parking on either side?
One side.
So the yellow lined road has parking along it on one side of the road.
Just one side, and it's not possible to
It's
do
not
on two
possible
sides?
to do two sides. Thank you, though.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right. Thank you all very much. Oh, Marcia, hello, come on.
Mine is not to do anything with the schools. I'm Marcia
Okay.
Rasmussen, Director of Planning. And I just want to go back to Article 22 for a quick second to say that after conversation with Diane Proctor from the League of Women Voters, she's raised a question about Junction Village, and we're going to research that and get that information back to her. We're not sure if it's the second or third round at the state level. So I just wanted you all to be aware of that tonight while it's being recorded. So thank you very much
Good,
for
thank you.
letting me.
Well, thank you all, both presenters and attenders, and for your questions. We are now we're adjourning this public hearing. Please be mindful that the Finance Committee has a short bit of business. We are reconvening our meeting that we had before the public hearing. So if you wish to talk, if you would please go away. We would be grateful.
No, Tom, they're welcome
There
to
are
sit in on
articles
it.
that we
It's a
didn't,
public meeting.
we
They can
didn't get
sit
to
in.
tonight.
I'm sorry.
There were articles that we didn't get to tonight that were on the agenda.
No.
No?
Don't think
Weren't
so.
the ones about the land transfer tax and the formula business
That was
on the
the last
agenda?
hearing.
Mr. Dane, those were part of the Finance Committee's deliberations before, and we agreed that we are going to take them up again at our meeting on March 7th.
But was there any?
There is no debate about
hearing.
them.
The hearing was
The hearing-
February
That hearing
11th.
was held previously.
The hearing was February 11th.
February 11th. Those were discussed at a hearing on February 11th.
They were listed on the published agenda for
You're
tonight's
right.
hearing.
You're right. He's right.
Huh?
No, remember, it was all screwed up.
Okay.
This is the ones.
See, we didn't put it there. We
Look.
didn't put the
you say you're
Affordable
talking about
Housing
real money?
Funding Committee things on here, which is when we discussed them.
I've been sitting here all night,
This
waiting for
man
them
is
to come
wondering,
up.
when are we going to talk about those?
So,
They put the school in back.
What was the total? It was 3 elementary schools.
Live streaming?
And the middle school.
Live streaming?
Yeah, 75.
We're having
Well,
a
no,
meeting.
I don't know what we ended up. No, that was for the thing that we passed. You were the moderator. Yeah, no, that was, it wasn't just, well, it was the master plan was all 3 elementary schools, Willen being half built, but then we modified that at town meeting to put, give a new Willen.
stack.
Where are the 6 million? Total between all the articles is 5.6 million.
For debt.
One was 15, one was 16.
For debt.
No,
One was
for all these
33.
asks, for
So,
the amount for the.
The school?
I can't hear you, but let me just say,
Yeah, yeah, that was a good question.
committee members, I would propose, June, Brian,
That was 16.
could I have your attention? So we're back in the original meeting. I would propose, since we've all been here for a little over 3 hours, that unless someone else or Carrie tells me that there's something we need to do, that we have a critical timing issue, that we take everything up at our meeting on March 7th. Are there any objections to that?
Good idea.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
it's been a
So
long
then
night.
I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And all those in favor, please leave.